All right, guys. Kwite has responded to the situation. I think this happened like a month ago. There stuff came out about it. Um, it's so funny because somebody mentioned like, oh, on Twitter, the person says that the proof that everything happened is because they have a diagnosed issue. That's it. That's what proves everything correct, I guess. I don't know how that works, but God bless. So interesting to see so many people on Twitter after watching the Kwite video go like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought this guy committed a crime, blah, blah, blah. It's like, bro, you guys are so weirdly terminally online to instantly believe everything that you see. I mean, of course you should like take everything seriously, but oh my God, everybody just like jumps on the bandwagon back and forth. It's embarrassing for so many people. Anyway, I'm gonna link a couple, like my original video on the situation and then like another one, because these allegations came out like 4 years ago. It was so weird. And in a video, like a now privated video that I was able to get access, or unlisted video I was able to get access to. So let's just get this whole thing started with what Kwite has to say.
To several allegations made against. This is my response to several allegations made against me. The most serious of which being that I sexually assaulted a former friend and ex-partner of mine named Orion in Orlando, Florida, on February 18th, 2018. This is patently false and completely untrue. Not only did I not assault Orion, I never had any sexual contact with him in any way, shape, or form. I have a lot of evidence to share backing what I say in this video, including a recording of Orion giving a testimony of this exact interaction from late 2018 that directly contradicts his current version of events. I've prepared what I have to say ahead of time, as this is something I wanted to make sure I had my thoughts in order for when discussing, so if you see my eyes flitting back and forth, that's why. I intend this as—
Is this Kwite's official face reveal? It's interesting. Good. I guess good for him, though. Okay.
As a comprehensive look at my time knowing Orion and afterwards, but certain things will be addressed out of order as I need to touch on the most severe allegations first. This video will be split into chapters for easy navigation if you want to jump around or come back to any section later. A very strong content warning on this video for discussions of sexual assault, transphobia, slurs, racism, self-harm, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and more. If any of these topics are sensitive ones for you, please use discretion while watching and make use of the chapters if you feel the need to skip any of these topics for your sake. Orion claims I assaulted him in the backseat of his car outside of the Cinemark XD Theater in Orlando before we went inside to watch a 3:40 p.m. showing of Black Panther. Orion—
Yeah, so basically, I guess the context there is that they apparently made a promise that when they met, if they hadn't done it by a certain age with somebody else, they would do it together. And then they planned to do it together, and then this is what the other person said. They said when they got there, Orion, what a name. That's why trans people shouldn't pick their own names. But anyway... So sorry. Just I got cold feet, didn't want to do it, but Kwite wouldn't take no for an answer. That's basically what everything else boils down to. All the other stuff, all the other like allegations about Kwite being like mean to the person were like just stupid to me. People grow apart. Like you could always take things out of like very much out of context. Relationships in general, whether they're like, you know, intimate or friendly, can be very complicated. So yeah.
And allege that mid-intercourse, I didn't listen to him when he said that I was hurting him, and when he told me to stop, I apparently didn't until some time after he had asked. And that all the way through the act, I was continuously telling him, this is what you wanted. Orion says when I did stop, it was only because I got bored of the sex, and then I exited the car. He goes on to say that after we got into the theater that I had him buy me popcorn to make up for it. This is entirely false on multiple levels, and I have no idea why Orion would this egregiously and ridiculously fabricate a crime of this magnitude. This clip is of Orion describing the same day the assault allegedly took place in a video 4.5 years ago, where he has a very different account of how he felt about that day, even in hindsight looking back at it.
Cut to February, where we met up for the second time, and I remember—
Very masculine voice.
It was February because we went to see Black Panther. It was fun, and I distinctly remember him getting out of my car, but stopping midway and saying, just remember I really care about you, and then closing the door, which made me feel really good because, you know, this was my best friend. We had met up for the second time. He still cares about me.
Throughout the entire video, that clip is taken from a testimony given.
I mean, just because she felt like you said that to her and felt though, it doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't do it. Like you could have done what you did and then still said that. I'm not saying he did do it. I'm just saying that like these things can exist, they can coexist together, you know?
Much closer to when the assault allegedly took place, the topic of sexual or romantic activity between me and Orion is not mentioned a single time. I'll be going through everything I've been able to gather around mine and Orion's interactions to give my side of how the time we knew each other went, and to
I mean, that would potentially make sense only if there was like a more traumatic experience to them. You know, I'm not saying that it actually happened. I'm just saying that that doesn't necessarily mean it didn't happen. If it was like an upsetting experience for them, maybe they wouldn't want to bring it up at all. And maybe they felt nice that even like, again, I don't know if I'm not saying I believe what the other person said, but part of it could have just been like a cope, I guess, possibly. I'm not saying it was, I'm just saying. But okay.
Demonstrate what things Orion alleges happened that conflict with what I have to show. Every single thing I have been accused of, not just from this set of allegations, but the one Orion tried to spread in that video from 2018, have never once been substantiated by any solid evidence other than testimony. The only thing ever backing any accusations Orion made against me was a person saying that something happened, oftentimes while contradicting other things they said when giving separate testimonies. Currently, outside of proving that me and Orion did know each other, did meet up in person, and discussed sexual intimacy over text at some point, none of proving that me and Orion did know each other, did meet up in person, and discussed
we already knew this. Yeah, they talked about doing
sexual intimacy over text at some
Richard Nixon thumbnail thing, whatever.
Some point, none of which is proof of anything malicious. Orion has failed to prove anything he claims I have done. This is my...
Well, yeah, they're both like within the same age too, so even if they did consensually do something, it's irrelevant. You know what I mean? So it's...
my account of that day. When we met up on February 18th, at one point, me and Orion were in a shopping center and came across a store that sold plushies. I saw one I liked that I was looking to buy for myself as a keepsake of the trip. Orion, through what I assume was trying to be polite, didn't want to let me pay for the plush and was very insistent that I let him cover the cost. In general, I like to pay for my own things.
Typical man, am I right?
Went out with friends, and around this time is when YouTube was first doing well for me, so I knew I'd have money coming in not far down the line. This made me want to pay for my own things even more. When any of y'all first got a job as a kid or a new position that gave you a higher level of income for the first time, I'm sure you felt the same way. You want to use the money you feel for the first time that you've earned yourself to do things for yourself. This plush was not a shared cost. It was something I wanted to get specifically for me. I genuinely did not want Orion to pay for my stuff when I felt I could finally do so on my own. That is more than likely a pride thing, but it is how I was. I distinctly remember the cashier who was watching us bicker about it at checkout say something along the lines of, sometimes you just gotta let them pay for it, in a cheeky, young love kind of way. After going back and forth on it some, I directly communicated to Orion that I would be more comfortable if he let me pay for it myself, and I tried to be as direct and clear with this as possible. In response, Orion said something to the effect of, okay, I'll let you buy it if you give me a kiss later. This was a weirdly identical mirror to a similar...
if you pay for snacks, I will smooch you. You don't want to do that now. I'll pay for them and dodge your affection. Okay, fair enough. Well, this shows that there was like mutual flirting between the two of them, which I think we already kind of knew in the first place based on their story.
Situation that happened over text the day before, which I will be sharing. This time, though, I didn't get to just put the phone down and not engage. I'm actively looking to buy this thing in the moment, and Orion is right in front of me. I regret agreeing to the proposal in hindsight, and maybe if I hadn't, Orion would have stopped pushing at some point. But in this somewhat awkward situation, my brain sees that as the most immediate way out of an uncomfortable spot and to pay for the item myself like I wanted. At the time, I took the comment to be lighthearted and honestly didn't think it was something that was going to get followed through on. Later that day, though, Orion and I are in the driver's seat and passenger seat of his car, respectively, when the topic of the kiss comes up again. What I'm about to say is not a standard of consent I would have applied to anybody else back then, and it's something I've learned is also true for me and I'm deserving of as I got older. Back then, though, I was a lot younger. I was 17 and had complete shit for brains. In my head, I'm thinking, fuck, that's right, I did agree to that. Since it's come up again, I'm thinking that Orion meant it seriously and I misread the situation, and that it would be shitty to now pull out of something I'd already committed to. That is not how consent works in the slightest, even on something as relatively small as a kiss, but despite my hesitance, I did kiss Orion once. That's it. That's all we ever did. Immediately after, I was feeling weird about it. I wasn't exactly enthusiastic about the event in the first place, and I didn't want to go any further with it, so we didn't. I am not trying to paint this as some instance of me being assaulted or violated, and me and Orion can both only give our personal accounts as there wasn't a camera in the car that...
Yeah, no, it does seem like that, but maybe he's just, you know, expressing himself. It doesn't sound like so far that they did anything violating either, because I don't want people to like have this like insane flipping of the script. You know, some saying like, oh, I'll pay, you pay for it, or, you know, but you give me a kiss later. That's like flirting. You don't, you know, if they grab you and force you to kiss them, obviously it's a problem, but this other person was just flirting with them. So far based on Kwite's story. So it just seems like two young kids being two young kids more than anything else.
That day, but the dynamic we had regarding sex and intimate contact is significantly different than what Orion made it out to be. In my account, is far more in line with not only incidents prior to the meetup, but the type of thing Orion was saying he'd do to me just the day before. Like I said, I never had sex with Orion, and the popcorn I had him apparently buy for me is something I explicitly said the day before we met up that I would buy for Orion. I had him apparently buy for me is something...
To Orion, fine, then I'm buying your snacks. No, nope, deal with it. Yeah, flirting, okay.
I explicitly said the day before we met up that I would buy for Orion. After asking multiple times how much I owed Orion...
Tell me how much I owe you.
For my movie ticket, he wouldn't let me pay him back for the cost. Again, this is literally the day before we saw each other in real life, and I was in that same mindset of wanting to pay for my own things with my own money. I responded to him, fine, then I'm buying your snacks, as that was meant as a compromise on my part. I figured if he wasn't going to...
I don't know, it comes off as flirtatious to me, which doesn't matter. I'm just saying that's what it comes off as.
Budge on the tickets.
Especially based on the fact that like he was flirting with, well, they were flirting with each other, talking about hotel rooms and stuff like in the one DM he showed, which is fine. I'm just saying it just sounds like two people flirting with each other, like two young people flirting.
I can at least do this thing to contribute, even if it was a bit uneven. In my head, it was at least something. We go back and forth over text where Orion keeps trying not to let me buy even his snacks, but I'm standing my ground, and after the third time he tried to get me to not pay for it, I just stopped responding, because I had already said what I planned on doing for my part. Over an hour passes by after that, and Orion is still for it. Orion keeps trying not to let me buy even his snacks, but I'm standing my ground. Or passes by after that, and Orion is still insistent on this. He texted me a brand new proposal saying, if you pay for snacks, I will smooch you. You don't want that now, do you? And yeah, quite frankly, I didn't want that. This is a
that's flirting.
Proposal saying, if you pay for snacks, I will smooch you. You don't want that now, do you?
What'd you say to that?
And yeah, quite frankly, I didn't want that. This is a
So you should have said, I didn't want that.
hearted text exchange, so I'm not going to send in all caps, I do not consent or something like that, but I try to communicate that I don't want to in a relatively playful but straightforward way. I'll pay for them and dodge your affection. And even
well, I guess that is, that actually is a pretty good way to dodge that. I'll pay for them and dodge your affection. Could still be flirtatious, but actually could just be like, I'm not even interested in you. I wonder why they were talking about the hotel room thing then. Just curious. Maybe he was
at that point, Orion still wasn't taking no for an answer. He doubled down and said he was going to smooch me anyways. Nah, you can't dodge the smooch.
Okay.
It will find you and it will smooch when you least expect it. There is no dodging, only smooch. Maybe he meant that playfully, but
Probably, but this guy quite didn't respond, so it actually seems like Quite wasn't super into it. How old were they? Because like now it's coming off like a bunch of young people that don't really know how to fucking, you have to be very direct. Although Quite was somewhat, it was indirect, but it was somewhat direct. Okay. Sure.
I didn't respond to it because I was uncomfortable with the way he was talking to me. I'd said my piece on how I felt about buying the snacks as well as getting kissed, and he just kept going. I'm sure that when Orion tried to pay for my stuff, it was meant with good intentions. But in these moments, I set a clear boundary of what I preferred that he essentially said he'd only respect conditionally. This type of insistent behavior, specifically to pay for things, aren't isolated incidents. Orion even admits he has this tendency in the same testimony I shared a clip of earlier.
He drove halfway and I drove to a certain spot and we agreed to meet up. I took him around town and I paid for everything because I insisted that since I was the host, it was my job.
In regards to physical intimacy, the entire time me and Orion knew each other, I was the one most often expressing my hesitance on the matter, backing out because I got cold feet or just outright denying to do intimate things with him. Meanwhile, Orion was always the one
dumb kids,
more forward about engaging in physical intimacy. Even if sometimes it was in a lighthearted context, Orion had a disregard for my personal choices and boundaries that I had expressed to them, often persisting beyond me showing clear discomfort and continuing to press even when I had directly declined the physical intimacy he would propose. One of the screenshots Orion used as proof of his claims is literally Orion floating and initiating the idea of us hooking up when we see each other.
Right. Also, what are your family doing while hang? Because if they're out, hotel empty. We'll see.
And my response
come
is,
on, sheets no good, bro. Oh, okay. That actually might not be flirtatious. That might just being like, oh, I don't want to go to a hotel because there's coom on the sheets. Okay.
Being unsure, then stating a reason why I wouldn't want to do it. He also cropped out the next message where he's the one to push for it even further by asking if I have condoms. You
okay.
Want to do it. He also cropped out the next message where he's the one to push.
You got condoms? Okay. Yeah, what's the response to that?
Push for it even further by asking if I have condoms. You could read that as him trying to give solutions to a problem that I brought up, but I personally didn't want to continue with that discussion because I wasn't comfortable. Orion says that we had been on and off flirting and talked about how if we were both single and virgins, we would take each other's virginity. This is not something that was ever formally and fully agreed upon from my end, and much less as something we do at some specific place.
Well, even if it was, it doesn't matter, but...
Time. The virginity thing was first mentioned over half a year earlier in August 2017, where Orion was the one to originally propose the idea in a voice call, and I was the one who
I love you, but I'm serious about the offer. I'll think about it. Heart platonic seems more gay than platonic. Okay. Okay. Yeah, actually kind of seems so far that Quite's kind of dodging everything. I don't think that so the thing is, I wouldn't assign some kind of predatory intent to this Orion person. In the same way I wouldn't do that to like another person. But that's like young inconsiderateness. Obviously, you need to be better about being direct, but also you need to be better about taking like pretty obvious hints, which is happening here. But he's definitely showing that he didn't even have an interest in this person. So, like, it's kind of debunks the whole narrative. Where did this like person come up with this like insane argument then?
Wanted to think on it further. While I don't have a recording of that call for the exact wording, Orion specified that a heart message he sent was platonic, and in response, I joked that it didn't seem very platonic, just straight up gay. That's because we weren't talking about just cuddling or something in that vein. He had proposed explicitly having intercourse, and I was the one still unsure about it. The reason I was in Florida was never to hook up with Orion. I was vacationing.
Essentially unsure about it. Well, it sounds like they were considering it then, which is fine. I'm just saying. But if you're unsure about it, if you were sure you didn't want to, I'm not saying it doesn't matter. My point is that like it seems like there is a little bit of an interest from Quite to this person. They might just be very nervous. So
vacationing with my family. Orion was always aware of this, and I only planned to see Orion in Orlando because he was someone I knew who lived in the area. Another time, on December 26, 2017, after a voice call and small message exchange, Orion asked me to come down south, and at the time, I straight up said no. Where Orion then jumps to the reason for this being, oh yeah, your penis no working.
Okay, Jesus, what the fuck?
Essentially assuming the reason I wouldn't come down was specifically because of not being able to do sexual things, when I'm not the one who has ever been shown to be the person most concerned about doing that. My penis not working, meaning my performance issues, are another thing that I'll get into shortly, but even though at the time I probably meant my response lightheartedly, as when it happened, I did see this conversation as just jibbing with a friend. When I said, this is why I don't hang out with you, it still has a pretty clear undertone on how I felt about the situation. Another time, on October 28th, 2017, Orion tried calling me, and when I didn't pick up, he said this: I know you're online, fuck you. If you don't pick up, I'm gonna fuck you. I'm pretty explicit when I say in response, don't fuck me, and then I'm busy. Busy being an e-thought, okay? I will fuck you. You didn't pick up, I don't make the rules. I didn't have a strong reaction back then, as it seemed pretty lighthearted, but also because this was how Orion would joke towards me being busy or denying them things fairly regularly. When I said no to having Orion on a podcast I had, he said he'd suck me off if I did. When he asked me for a Discord rank, and I said no, Orion said they'd fuck my ass. And on the rare occasion you do see me reciprocate a sexual advance, like the Skype log where I tell him, you have
I'll watch it. Have the visual porn, I will.
To draw porn, and Orion says, I will. It is still a topic that Orion was the first to bring up the idea of, had initiated by sending me explicit pictures he had drawn himself, and well after the last time I had said anything concerning the topic, Orion would continue to mention as something he was willing to do. All this...
Yeah, so Orion seems like a bit of a sex pest, annoying person, obviously. I mean, frankly, you probably shouldn't have been friends with this person if they were this, or violating your boundaries this much. I'm not, obviously Orion shouldn't be a fucking obnoxious person, but it's just something to keep in mind as well. I wonder why they maintain their relationship. So, I don't...
Still being something only happening over the internet, where it required no actual physical contact on my part, making my anxiety around it much more manageable. Orion claimed that we are both ex-friends and partners who had been in an on and off relationship from sometime in 2017 till February 2018. The screenshot Orion showed of him asking who he could tell about his dating, where I respond, but I prefer to keep it to mutual friends, but I ultimately trust his judgment.
Oh, so they were dating.
With whoever. That was said in the only period of time we have both agreed on the term dating. A period of time that lasted less than 2 days. What Orion...
Okay, yeah, so they were dating in some capacity. Oh, okay.
Never showed was that at the end of that conversation those lines were cherry-picked from, there was an abrupt tone shift. 2 days. What Orion never showed was that at the end of that...
Let's see, I can't... We're gonna tell we're dating. If you tell them your secret, that's just your judgment, probably keep it to people I know. Well, okay, then there's hearts. What's the
conversation those lines were cherry-picked from? There was an abrupt tone shift where the conversation switched from something two people...
Not as funny as you're cute. Listen here, buddy boy. You're hot. That's you. No, okay. You guys are flirting. You guys are dating.
Especially in a new relationship, might say to each other to something more like strangers, making small talk for the first time. This... Two people freshly in a new relationship might say to each other to something more like...
Okay, morning, how are you? Okay.
Strangers making small talk for the first time. This is because the night before, barely a day into us being together, I broke it off. The relationship started because I told Orion I had a crush on him after meeting up for the first time in June 2017. But I was also the one who just as quickly broke it off. I don't have a recording of this phone call saved, but all the reasoning I stated in the call was explicitly mentioned and discussed in that text conversation where we spoke with each other more like coworkers than good friends or partners. It confirms that I was the one who ended it because I was scared I'd made the wrong and a rash decision and had only gone to Orion as a rebound. I was coming off the back of a very bad breakup with an ex-boyfriend who started dating another friend of ours just a day or two after saying me and him should call it quits. And while that technically didn't overlap with the time we were together, it felt like my ex had cheated on me twice within 4 months at that point. And while I'm older and mostly over it now, it hurt a lot at the time. It was just a week after that breakup that I saw Orion and this whole relationship dialogue happened and then ended. Well, in this instance, it was me who admitted having feelings for and wanting to become closer in a romantic way with Orion. At no point did we ever do anything sexually intimate outside of sending flirtatious messages within that time frame and outside of it. And it was also me who called off taking our friendship to that next level of intimacy because I was again the one getting cold feet from my nerves around the situation. My apprehension when it comes to sexual contact is not limited to Orion. Not only did I never have sex with him, I have never had sex with anyone. Even as of recording this video, I am still a virgin. It has been a long-running insecurity of mine due to my general focus on work.
Hey, once you hit 30 years old, you'll become a wizard. So keep it up, you know.
The pandemic killing the ability to pursue anything in that vein for years, as well as causing me to backslide in my social ability and confidence like it did most people, a fair few of my friends have had to deal with me drunkenly venting about my nervousness around it. And it's something I have had casual discussions with my friends about.
Yeah, it makes sense as to why they were dodging most of the sexual conversation stuff. They probably need to be with somebody that's not like super sexually driven, which is nothing wrong with that. And clearly Orion was not the correct person. So, yeah.
a year and a half after Orion claimed I had raped him. The part in those DMs where I mentioned me getting my penis sucked one time was in reference to summer 2018, right after my senior year ended. I was talking to a girl I was friends with from my school who had thrown a graduation party where we ended up making out. One of the nights after, I ended up at their place again, and I got fellatio from them. I told my friend Ethan that we didn't go any farther because I didn't have condoms on me, but what I didn't mention was that I had her stop the oral early because I couldn't feel it or get my penis entirely hard. I can masturbate on my own just fine, but when it comes time to do the deed with someone else, my nerves have stopped me from being able to perform because I have incredible...
It's not funny. I feel bad because like this is not something that this isn't something that Kwite should have to tell people. I was just thrown off by it. It just threw me off. Listen, I'll be real with you. I've talked about this before. You know, when I first started doing the do, I didn't really have a whole lot of sexual confidence. Like I would be able to masturbate, but like after my first girlfriend, my sexual confidence was so low. Excuse me, that like I couldn't even get it hard enough to like put it into a girl for a while. So I mean, that's over now. I built my confidence back up, mostly from using a ring, if you know what that is. Okay, for some reason 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 for some reason that helped a lot building the confidence. It's good for blood flow, and you know, a lot of times it's a big confidence thing, so there's some advice to Kwite. Use a cock ring. But yeah, that sucks that he has to admit that. It's rough. You know?
Incredibly bad sexual anxiety when it comes to the actual physical act. It's to the point where every time I've been in a real life sexual situation, it has caused me to be the one to back out of them before it can ever fully progress to intercourse. One person I did mention this insecurity to was Orion, who in late 2017 I vented to about an earlier incident where a boyfriend I had at the time was giving me a hand job and I just could not get it up all the way or finish. I was already an insecure teenage virgin and I was stupidly embarrassed about having these performance issues. So I essentially begged Orion not to share what I confided in him. Me and that boyfriend tried more than once and never figured it out, and my unsuccessful attempts to get it up persisted until just 3 months before the alleged rape, at which point me and my then boyfriend had broken up, so I was not doing it with anyone at all. That is a major issue I would have had to figure out very quickly in the time between those messages in February when Orion says the assault happened. Further showing he knew about this still persistent issue and insecurity of mine, you might remember a message I showed earlier where he poked fun at me for my dick not working in regards to me not wanting to meet up with Orion down south. The cold feet I get with sexual contact is something I've had another stunted interaction because of as recently as February of this year. The last day I was in Brighton in early February, I was making out with a guy who I got on with in a club named Club Revenge. But I chickened out of doing more and left the club early because I was nervous and I had a flight home in the morning. It was to the point where he even offered to come over just to keep me company because of how anxious I ended up getting in the club. This has been a continuous issue, not just with getting it up, but engaging in sex in general that has made me incredibly anxious to go all the way with anybody at all. These examples might seem sparse, but there are so few because they are genuinely the only times I have ever been in a situation close to actual sexual intimacy, with me failing to follow through every time. Part of this anxiety stems from me having also been sexually assaulted in the past, both before the time Orion alleges I assaulted them and after. Once by a coworker over twice my age when I was 17 and working an awful fast food job, and the other was in a club when I was 19 by someone who thought I was more into them than I was, but didn't bother to check before putting their hands on me. Pain is not meant to be compared, but I do know what it's like to have your agency taken from you and to feel helpless to do anything about it. Being told over and over again I did the worst version of that to somebody else when I know what it feels like from experience has been soul-crushing. In his twit longer, Orion says that when several months passed after the falling out, that he tried to come out about the alleged emotional abuse he suffered, but that he received harassment and calls to his house telling him to kill himself for it, which only worsened his mental state. This is in reference to a video I've used several clips of so far while making my arguments that was uploaded by a YouTuber named Tuskspicious and at the time of the upload went by Oceanus. If Orion was harassed and threatened for being in that video, I completely and harshly condemn those actions.
I think I know what they're talking about. That was the video that I was referencing at the beginning where so somebody popped in that I found from like a while back. I think that it was such a bizarre video. Yeah, this is it. Yep, that's the one. That's the one that I'm referring. Sorry, let me just hide this for a second. Yeah, this is the one. Tuskspicious. It was a really weird video. They didn't bring up the allegations in this video, but like it was weird. The focus was on a lot of the focus was because Kwite would put tags of like other famous YouTubers in his metadata, and he's a bad guy, and the whole thing was filtered through a lens of like content creation. It came off like super weird to me. Okay.
Ryan should never have been put through that. If people out there did those things, they should be ashamed of themselves and know they have no safe harbor in my community. I have never and would never instigate or support this kind of behavior. That video is something I have never acknowledged publicly until now. This is because I viewed the video then and still do now as an attempt to put my reputation into question by saying anything that its creator could think of. Whether it was based on shaky evidence or even no evidence at all, it didn't matter. It was designed to get a reaction out of me. That video was called Giving Kwite the Axe, and Tusk explicitly said in the video it was made with the goal of destroying my career.
This species is called a kwite.
It was pretty
often
cringe.
located in a bland setting and can be seen wielding an item whilst recording. It's time to give the axe to his career.
In it, Orion gave a spoken testimony about their timeline of knowing me and the apparent emotional abuse I did to them. That testimony was the only thing he gave to support his claims back then, much like the current allegations. Both times, Orion said a whole...
Yeah, and again, like, it's weird because it was a lot of shit that you would have to interpret in the worst way possible. You know, a lot of it just came off to me. Like, one of them was like, oh, he got famous and he stopped talking to me as much. And I was like, okay, maybe you just grew apart. But they try to assign as much like negative energy to it as possible. I mean, realistically speaking, if you are no longer friends with somebody, a lot of times like that means that something happened in some kind of a way of a falling out. And that's just part of life. And some people will just try to over-exaggerate that and make it seem like the worst thing in the entire world happened, when the reality is that sometimes people just like fall out with each other. It's not that deep, you know?
Lot, and gave next to nothing, or literally nothing in this video's case, to substantiate any part of his claims. The video is littered with falsehoods, outright lies, and contradictions of Orion's current version of events. For example, the clip I showed at the start of the video, where when discussing the day we met up and watched Black Panther, Orion described two completely different versions of events, both tonally and even how he felt about the event after the fact.
It was fun, and I distinctly remember him getting out of my car, but stopping midway and saying, just remember, I really care about you.
What was completely missing from that video was any mention of sexual contact at all. I don't mean just sexual misconduct. I mean any account of us having any physical intimacy at any point. What Orion did do was publicly out my struggles with self-harm.
I wasn't his best friend, but I was one of his closest. I had helped him through self-harm, which I'm still susceptible to.
This is something that I...
Yeah, I remember too, like one of the allegations was that, I don't know, like, I don't know, it was so weird. It was like, I struggle from like a mental issue, but Kwite didn't know that because it was undiagnosed at the time and we didn't know at all. But it's still his fault for taking advantage of me. It's like, well, if nobody knows about it, how could he take advantage of you based on this? It's just fucking weird.
I have never at any point before that video was uploaded all the way till now ever spoken publicly about or ever intended to. It is one of my deepest and most personal struggles that Orion was willing to expose to the public without a care just because it became useful as a tool to hurt me with. And it feels like, considering what he says later, to hold over my head that he knew about. Throughout the video, Orion continuously drives home how good of friends we used to be before saying how many secrets he had on me.
So after he didn't respond to Discord messages, I texted him on his phone because I had his phone number, as well as I'd met his parents, I had his address. I have a lot of secrets on him because we were best friends.
This video came off as malicious to me when it was first released and still does now. Considering the private issues of mine Orion was willing to share about me in public, I feel like nothing, even just a passing comment, would have been off the table. And yet any mention of sexual contact is completely absent in any form from his previous testimony. In that testimony, from the jump, Orion gets the timeline of events objectively wrong. In the video, Orion says we met in early 2016.
I met Kwite early 2016, around about January, because it was around about my birthday.
This is instead of early 2017, like he says now, and all records point to the latter being the case. This directly puts the timeline he gave back then off by a year. You could excuse Orion as having misspoken, but it's a mistake he makes every time he mentions what year something happened in.
But then we started to get really, really close.
Album mistake, huh?
Especially around about summer of 2016, we met up in my home city.
When that actually happened was in summer 2017. Orion's current version of events agrees with me that we had first met both online and in real life in 2017.
Cut to planning to VidCon. We met up in February of 2017. Cut to February where we met up for the second time, and I remember it was February because we went to see Black Panther.
Orion implied Black Panther came out in 2017. He says cut to February 2 separate times, but only mentions what year it was once. He either means that I met up with him only the one time in February 2017, which was when we would have watched Black Panther, and is objectively untrue, or he added an entirely new instance of us meeting up, which puts an extra year on the timeline of our friendship. Either way it was meant, his timeline of these alleged events would be objectively wrong and at odds with his current version of the allegations. If you think I'm nitpicking with the years, this isn't an issue exclusive to raw dates, but spans of time.
Well, no, it's not really nitpicking. It's just being incredibly thorough. Frankly, for me, based on the allegations and everything around it, and how like toxic the internet sphere can be, all Kwite would have had been like, "Yo, bro, I didn't do it." It's like a he said, she said, and I would be like, okay. I don't know, man. It's really interesting how normalized it is online to fabricate like false allegations over and over again. I don't know what it is, but people are obsessed with like People are obsessed with like rape on the internet. It's fucking insane. Everything it looks through is put through like the worst lens possible. People are unhinged like goblins. It's really weird. And you know, nowadays, not to be that guy, but like a guy's a guy usually. You really can't be too careful around women. At least on the internet. It's fucking crazy, man, because they'll turn around and just like weaponize some dumb shit against you. It's fucking unhinged. You know, it's crazy. It happens. It's fucking nuts. I don't know. And it's, you know, it's probably something that overall doesn't happen as much as like actual allegations, you know, like falsifying them, but it feels like a fucking 50-50 split of like a false allegation over and over again, or something out of context, or something this and this and that. It's just fucking crazy, man. It's insane. What a burnout. It's just fucking out of control. People don't really care, you know. And it's nuts that like when I was on the Twitter, there were so many people that were like, "Oh my god, I can't believe that I can't believe I thought Kwite did this. Oh, I feel so bad." Like, why did you instantly believe it? Like, that's another problem too. It's because they're all dumb kids that engage in this drama, and that's what it basically boils down to, for the most part. He has to respond because, you know, it was a destruction of his credibility. But like, it's all boils down to drama. Like, sexual assault is LOL drama now. Like, that's the cool thing. For some reason, people love it. They're obsessed with it. They think it's so cool. It's just everything has to be this. It's exhausting because it's so invalidating of people's like issues over and over and over again. It's nuts, man. It's nuts. Everything is just something fucking crazy, and people eat it up. They eat it the fuck up. But hey.
Time as well. In the video, Orion says I started ignoring him for 2 weeks after seeing Black Panther.
2 weeks later, he randomly starts ignoring me.
In his current version of events, Orion said that several months had passed after Black Panther before I cut him off. The reality is closer to Orion's original testimony, but both are still wrong. The call where we fell out happened on March 20th and was almost a month to the day after we had last met up on February 18th. My contact with Orion had petered off into almost nothing only a week before, but we did still occasionally message. In the period of absolute silence where I didn't speak to Orion through text, call, or otherwise at all was only 3 days long.
Text, call, or otherwise at all. What a beautiful rhyme.
Orion also claimed I called him out of nowhere.
In the middle of a call with one of my dear friends, The Right Opinion, I get a call from him.
Damn.
And I think, oh,
The Right Opinion's been silent since this one, guys. I mean, do you really think that like they're deer? Do you really think that like The Right Opinion is actually a deer, though? You know what I mean? No, all jokes aside, do you really think that they're good friends? Because this Orion person seems a little. You know, they seem like the kind of person that would be like, oh, I'm really good. Oh yeah, I'm really good friends with this person. Like, they go to a book signing of like Donald Trump or something and be like, we're really good friends. I don't know why Donald Trump, let's say the Spike from Buffy. He went to, they went to a book signing from Spike from, we're really good friends. You know, that's just kind of the energy that I get here. So.
Finally, he's made some time. He's not busy anymore.
When in reality, I was returning the single call Orion had given me over those 3 days only 2 hours after he had originally sent it. Towards the end of his testimony, Orion had this to say about what he did after our March 2018 call.
I texted, DM'd a shared friend of ours, asking if, you know, just because Kwite doesn't like me right now, if we could still be friends. Obviously, Kwite had talked to him because he then sent me a 5+ paragraph note about how disgusting and selfish I was.
I think I said when I originally reacted to this video, I said maybe they were kind of disgusting. I don't know. It's like, I show it to us. I don't think that they ever showed it to us. I don't know. It sounds like they just had a falling out.
Told me a lot of the things that Kwite had told me.
Tusk shows the screenshots of this at the end of the video where it's revealed the friend of ours was Kappa Kaiju, who it sucks I have to name in this, but I don't feel I could properly make this point without doing so. Orion said that Kappa's opinion was a result of Kwite having talked to him already.
Oh, it was Cap, right? Okay, it wasn't quite. Didn't send it. Okay, never mind. I got that wrong. My bad.
Obviously, Kwite had talked to him because.
And I had spoken to him first, but the nature of that discussion and what Orion did to prompt it is very important. In that March call, I was giving Orion, to the best of my ability, a level-headed explanation of why I wanted to cut them off. He was codependent. He was a drain on me emotionally and mentally, and he had long gotten in the way of A, my efforts to take care of my own mental health, and B, live my life. Orion told me that he apparently knows.
Yeah, and that's that's just kind of one of the unfortunate realities, man. Is that I said this in that video too, but you know, It's unfortunate when you're struggling mentally, you know, but at the end of the day, you're not entitled to anybody like still being your friend. You know, I think you should always be more considerate, of course, if somebody has an extra struggle. But at the end of the day, it can be a very emotionally exhausting and draining experience to try to deal with somebody that has like a significant mental health issue. And sometimes you just can't handle it. And it's the unfortunate reality of life. But that is just life, man. You know, there's only so much you can do. That's it. You know, you don't have to stay with somebody or be somebody's friend just because they're struggling mentally. And unfortunately, sometimes, not all the time, but this person might be one of those people with mental health issues can weaponize them. I've had people weaponize health issues against me before. You feel bad, you know, you go above and beyond, but at the end of the day, they lean into their mental health issue with very little intention to actually change for the better. So, you know, that's life, man. That's just life sometimes. It's just unfortunate.
I'd been withdrawing from my older friend group overall in favor of new people. At the time,
that's why if you have like an issue, like a mental health issue, like always acknowledge it and get the treatment that you need for it. But also understand that like you still have to work on yourself and you shouldn't excuse every bad behavior that you have on your mental health issue. Because just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you can't control it to some extent. Because you can, right? These are just like in our society, we classify these things as like some kind of mental health issue so that you can understand what kind of help you might need. Like you might need to monitor a particular behavior more than another person or be more aware of it, but that's still like on you, you know?
I could see there being some truth to this. I was hanging with some new people more, others less, but I was still in contact with plenty of folks I'd known for years in that community, a whole lot of whom I still talk to today. It was nothing actively malicious, but I could at least understand it from his perspective. But then he says that the mutual friend, Kappa, had agreed with him that they see this happening too. That was the first I'd ever heard of that. If it was true, if multiple of my friends are noticing this about me, it's like, whoa, am I the problem? So I asked. It turns out Kappa never said that. At the very least, not in the way Orion presented it to me. When Orion messaged Kappa about it, he specifically led with, hey, do you actually like me, like as a friend? Because Kwite backstabbed me. I want to make sure we're still friends. And Kappa, who I feel was understandably not happy having his name and word used to try and back me into a corner, didn't respond lightly. He shared his actual outside perspective of me and Orion's relationship. And if you...
that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. They let the goblin out because they were prompted. Because that comes off as like a really weird thing when you're like, oh, this person backstabbed me. Are we still friends? Like, it's one thing to be like, oh, hey, I had a falling out with like such and such. Like, are we still good? Like, can we still be friends even though myself and that other person aren't? That's different, but it almost sounds like they backstab me. It sounds very morally loaded. It sounds like you're almost looking to find a weakness. You know what I mean?
Read the whole thing, agreed with basically all my reasoning for removing Orion from my life, and also behavior that lines up with what you can see going through all of our message logs. For the most part, the rest of the video I haven't covered is Orion's claims I was emotionally abusive and would verbally batter him, while giving vague examples of what he claims I said with no solid proof to corroborate any of it. I'm not sure the reasoning for this part, but the history of this video's availability and publication status is notable as well.
Do you think that Orion's just racist and hated the Black Panther movie? Yeah, I think that's a good question that we should all be asking right now.
Original title in 2018 was Giving Kwite the Axe, Terms of Service Breach and More. And then at some point in the last few years between then and now, it got unlisted. That is until recently, when these new round of allegations came out, where Tusk republished the video with a new title, Giving Kwite the Axe, Transphobia and More. A notable thing to do, considering that since this video was old and made no mention of the alleged transphobia back then, it was a misrepresentation of what was in that video. Around the time he republished it, Tusk made a tweet with a video attached, a video I didn't manage to archive, unfortunately, but at least...
Damn. He re-uploaded it? That's even worse. This guy, why does this guy have such an axe to grind with Kwite? Like, it's one thing to have like this ridiculous hit piece, and that's kind of how it came off when I watched it. It's one thing to have like release that thing like years ago and then grow older and be like, yeah, I wish I didn't. But this guy is like held on to it for so long that he wanted to jump on the fucking bandwagon and throw it out there again. That's unhinged.
In the tweet caption, he promoted his newly titled and republished video, saying in it that he and Orion had talked about what Kwite had done in the past all the way back in 2019. Except they didn't. That video was made in September 2018. I can only make excuses for these two misspeaking so many times. In regards to everything around the original attempt to give the axe to my career, Tusk and Orion failed to get correct even the most objectively provable parts. What was interesting is Ethan deleted that tweet soon after making it at the apparent request of Orion. Not long after this, the YouTube video itself went unlisted again for a short period after that tweet got made. You can see it unlisted here with the new title and all before it was finally republished a third time, where as of writing this, you can still view it. If anything changes, though, it will be archived with all Orion and I's message logs in the description. Orion's pushiness was also not a dynamic unique to sexual situations. Orion would often push the limits of my other explicit personal boundaries if he wanted something that crossed them. And there were times I'd eventually cave after he repeatedly asked me for it, even if I was overall uncomfortable with the request. As a lot of the time, saying no hadn't been enough up until then, and giving in would get him to stop with minimal conflict.
Well, that would make sense as to why they aren't friends anymore. That might have been one of the reasons why they faded away from each other, because Orion just seems like an inconsiderate dickhead. So, with his dumb name, by the way, that they picked, which makes it even dumber.
Without me having to try and explain
you name yourself fucking Mason next time, asshole. Am I right, guys?
Detail why specific things make me uncomfortable. For example, Orion said this in their twitlonger. Kwite had a rule that I wasn't allowed to take any pictures of him, but he was allowed to take pictures of me. After promising and begging to...
Yeah, I remember that. Who cares? Like, Kwite's whole thing is he doesn't want his face on the internet. Like, who gives a shit? But who cares?
Take a few pictures that wouldn't and still haven't been posted for memory.
And then she was like, "Oh, I was able to take pictures." It's like I wasn't allowed to take pictures, and then I was able to take a picture. It's like, oh, okay. Because I remember, I think it might have been in that video they mentioned that they were able to get a picture. They just they had a promise not to post it. It's like weird shit, bro.
He let me take a few before he left. Then later, Orion says, I have a video with him to prove we were together at the time that I was able to post only for myself after begging him to take pictures with me because we were friends. Firstly, there was never some rule set up like that, and I didn't take pictures of Orion on that trip. Even if I had, their face was in the public and was something he had willingly shared before I ever would have taken these hypothetical pictures. How this section reads to me is that I had set a hard boundary of not taking pictures of my face. This was because that even back then, I was a faceless creator hoping to maintain that anonymity and had anxiety around any of my personal details getting shared with the public, whether that was through someone leaking them or an account someone used being compromised. But instead of respecting my set, stated, and acknowledged boundaries, Orion kept pushing, saying stuff like we're friends and that I could trust them with those pictures because of that. That's behavior he admits doing on multiple occasions. I agreed to do something I was generally not okay with to try and accommodate something Orion wanted because it seemed important to them. And the part where they said they still haven't posted those pictures anywhere is a lie. Not only did Orion obviously post the pictures of my face because of this current situation, but he also shared them around to people I didn't know at least around or before September 2018, as well as sharing other photos of me that I had taken of myself and only shared with a select group of people. Orion might not have posted them publicly until now, but
well, I wonder why they're not friends anymore, Orion.
I think taking pictures of my face that he assured me I could trust him with and sharing those pictures with people I don't know is a breach of that trust. And the way he has now used those pictures to dox me and make these kind of false accusations has proved that my initial fears were correct.
Is that doxing? It's just your face. I mean, it's not right. It's still wrong because they set a boundary. Search for and publish private or identifying information about a particular individual on the internet, typically with malicious intent. Oh, I guess technically. It's just a face, but it's still not right. Like, from a friend perspective, it's like a really shitty thing to do. You shouldn't be doing that. Okay.
Back to boundaries over physical actions. On Skype around April 2017, Orion said he wished he could hug me when I was going through something tough. I let him know that the gesture was appreciated, but that platonic touch was complicated for me, and I generally only wanted to cuddle or have that kind of contact with whoever my partner was at the time. Prolonged contact was my main issue. I was generally fine with hugs of greeting or goodbyes and more casual forms of touch. I have improved with time on this, and I am more tactile with people that I'm comfortable with now, but at the time, this was a boundary I had clearly and directly communicated to Orion. And to his credit, Orion did try to specify that whatever affection he had for me was platonic. However, just a few months later, when we first met up in June 2017, that respect didn't really hold up. You could argue that this is less serious considering that it was the day before we got together, but we also then broke up the day after. And at the time, the line...
Well, yeah, you guys were dating in some capacity. Like, I mean, not for nothing, but like I said before, people, they'll get into relationships and then they'll have very like negative interpretations of that relationship sometimes afterwards. Both parties will oftentimes, like, if you have a bad relationship, both parties will be able to, will have a negative interpretation of the event. So, like, there was clearly some kind of a relationship going on there where both of you were interested in each other in some capacity for you to date for at least even if it was for a very short period of time. The relationships are complicated. A lot of times people don't get into like relationships right off the bat. They might like flirt for a while, and it's young kids like exploring themselves and their boundaries and their different this and that. So, like, I'm not like Orion seems like a shitty person. But I'm not gonna I don't want people. I feel like some of the energy that comes off, or is the way that people could interpret it, 'cause I'm not trying to assign like a negative intentionality to Kwite, could be like malicious or like horribly like Brian's like a predator, which I don't think that's true. They just seem like an inconsiderate dickhead. So.
was drawn clearly at platonic touch being uncomfortable for me. And for most of the day, it wasn't a problem. Orion would certainly do some casual touch, but I didn't really mind, like a hug when we saw each other, an arm on the shoulder. That wasn't a problem. Important context to this is that Orion's dad chaperoned us from location to location pretty much the whole day. He was skeptical of his kid meeting a random dude off the internet in real life. He made a point to be there when I first met Orion, would only let Orion be in his car when driving to different places, and when we ended the day at his house, me and Orion stayed in the living room watching a movie the whole time, with him in the room at almost all times as well until I left to drive home. I had absolutely no plans to do anything physically intimate at this point, and it's here where Orion crossed my boundaries in a major way. In the photos Orion leaked of my face, specifically the ones where we're at his house, you can see I'm not the one initiating contact in any of them. I'm hanging off towards the end of the couch, and Orion is constantly leaning on me. When we sat down to watch Moana with Orion's dad in the room, Orion put his arms around me in a full embrace, and I froze up. And he stayed leaning onto and hanging off me for the whole runtime. Again, Orion's dad is there through the whole thing. He's followed us and kept track of where we are the whole day because he's concerned something would happen with Orion. And from the very first time I messaged Orion,
Dad's cock blocking, bro. That's fucked up.
The way up until that point, Orion has only ever described his parents as annoying, that he butted heads with them often, and he told me his parents were both physically and verbally abusive on the regular. With all that in mind, I was incredibly anxious, to say the least. I'm trying not to move a muscle or do anything that could be interpreted as me reciprocating or making a move.
Do you think that the parents actually are like abusive, or do you think that Orion's annoying and just is like kind of an asshole about their interpretation of literally everything in their life? Because I'm on the fence, fellas. I'm on the fence a little bit here, okay? I'm thinking that maybe Orion isn't the most credible source of information.
Because the dad is right there, and I'm under the impression he's on a hair's trigger. Orion knew I was uncomfortable with this kind of contact. He knew his dad did not like seeing him do that with me. And it made me feel like I was being used as a tool for Orion to stick it to his father. A type of, look at what I'm doing right in front of you that you won't do anything about. I know you hate it. And they did that at the expense of my boundaries and my sense of safety in that moment. You might argue, did you really care if you told Orion you had a crush on them the next day? But that wouldn't change that this was not the case when it happened, and that I broke it off with Orion less than 2 days after. That was a scenario I did not enjoy being in, and I was relieved when the movie ended, because it meant I could leave and get away from the position I'd been forced into. The way I had been used for someone else.
You know, it must have been bad if he couldn't wait for Moana to be over. I mean, I would understand something like I don't know, Frozen too, because that's not that good. But Moana, come on. Although Moana is a little mid. I like The Princess and the Frog a lot more. It's pretty good. I was surprised when I watched it, because you know how Disney is. They'll make sometimes I feel like they will just make like a lazy movie because it has a person of color as representation. Like has Star Wars, the new series was basically like that. They just put a bunch of women and people of color in there, and they decided that they didn't have to actually write a decent script, which was kind of an insult to the people of color and women that were in the story, because they were basically just set pieces. But hey, anyway.
It's his grudge. There were other minor incidents of Orion crossing this line in the time after, when we were explicitly not in a relationship. After Orion went down a spiral of questioning his self-worth and asking me if we were still friends, he said that when we meet up in February, in the same conversation as the come on bed sheets message, that he requires snuggles. And considering that he's just vented to me about not knowing if I still care about him, I don't want to say something that might make him second guess himself and go down that hole again. So I
$4.99. Much love to you and Mama Gut.
Oh,
Thanks for providing endless entertainment daily. Your content helps get me through the workday.
Hey, very cool. I appreciate that. Much appreciated. Now let's see if I can actually get to this thing over here. Oh, I got it. Paste.
Told him okay. But when we got closer to the actual day, it was still not something I was 100% on. The day before we met up, he told me the same thing, and my answer was another uncertain "we'll see." Even on relatively minor things, Orion would not take a very direct no or denial as a final answer the first time around. In 2017, I had a now deleted Discord server that I started when I was much smaller and had below 1,000 subscribers. I was basically just giving admin and moderator roles to my friends and the people I knew at the time. Since even though it was a community server, it was a very
hey, thank you for the small cup, brother.
Small one where most everyone knew each other and that didn't need a dedicated team. In January 2018, Orion asked me to give him a rank with authority in the Discord server. At first, I declined because I had multiple people already in the role he asked for, but as he continued to ask, I eventually gave it to him because he said he just wanted to help send out notifications for my videos. It's when my channel numbers started snowballing and more people were joining.
Oh, now they have bots for all that.
I realized that having a bare-bones server with only friends as staff wasn't really going to cut it. That original decision wasn't because of anything personal to Orion, it was because of that reasoning. As the community scaled, he just wasn't.
It can also be difficult to have friends in like the roles of a moderator because it's harder to enforce boundaries onto them. Sometimes they'll represent you poorly. And yeah, man, sometimes they'll just represent you poorly. They won't really listen to what you have to say because they feel like they can interpret like your, interpretations of things better than you. Because I'm friends with them, so I know what they, and they can kind of lose sight of, like professionalism. It's very difficult, and it's harder to, like talk to those people because they're your fucking friends, guys. It's your friend. How are you supposed to say anything about your friend? That's your friend, you know. So yeah, man, be careful about making friends as moderators. They'll go fucking ballistic, you know.
The type of person I wanted in that position of authority. I'll admit, I probably could have communicated that better at the time. I don't remember if we had any discussions about it at length in calls, but after I removed Orion's role, he, I assume jokingly at first, sent a "how dare you demote me" message, which was fair enough. It seemed lighthearted. Not long after that, I had noticed Orion putting personal details of mine in my Discord server. It was admittedly benign ones at first.
I feel like I've had this before. I've had this situation kind of before too. Like I decided that when I refreshed, I went from streaming on Twitch to streaming on YouTube, and I decided to take away everybody's monitor, whatever. Okay. I went from streaming on Twitch to streaming on YouTube, and I decided to take everyone's mods away because I wanted to have full control. This was when I was like, okay, I want to do something a little different on the main YouTube, which is now just an archive channel. I was like, I'm going to be more professional. I'm just going to make this the stream channel. I'm going to leave the stream up almost like a Papa Gut show. And then I'm going to post all the clips on like the leftovers channel, which is this channel now. And when I did that, there was some people who took it really, really personally, as if I had like personally affronted them. And I just wanted to scale back and move forward in a professional way. And I thought everybody would understand. They didn't. And they got very irritated. And, they kind of just went off. It was unfortunate. But what are you going to do, man? I'm just trying to look out for, just trying to do what's best for me, But hey, man, that is life. That's life.
Like that I had a trampoline, but at the time it was something I was very cagey and anxious about, so I let him know not to do that. That's not something people are usually concerned about leaking online, so I didn't blame him really, and Orion seemed receptive. Except just 10 minutes later, I have to tell him to stop again because he was telling people I was a bottom, and that hadn't clocked to him as personal. It was a bit frustrating, but again, I let it go. The next day, Orion again tells me to give him his Discord rank back, and I give a non-answer, a tentative, I'll think about it. Where after that, Orion then lists a bunch of reasons why he should have the role. Then, not 5 minutes later, he shares information that, while definitely vague, is language I was not comfortable with being used about me in public at the time. This conversation is where the looks part us meeting up is fine message that Orion showed is from. As back then, I had a video that is now deleted talking about, in part, when I first met up with Orion. That was something I had revealed publicly, so it was fair game to talk about. Orion was describing me as a cutie in my Discord server, and I understand that's another weird thing to consider sensitive information, but my headspace as an anonymous creator just starting to get any traction was to be overly cautious. Orion seemed to understand this and asked for some do's and don'ts about what he could share about me, which I appreciated. But after that, Orion asked if he can @ me in the server if he has a question, like something he wants me to respond to publicly in general chat. I told him to ask the question he wanted answered in DMs, and it was very nothing burger stuff. So I tell him no straight up to doing that publicly because it could cause other people to start pinging me in the server over random stuff as well. At this point, Orion has shared multiple pieces of what I considered personal info, and I had to tell him to stop more than once, so you can argue that one's on me. But he also wants to be able to ping me in my public server to ask random questions he wants me to give a public response to. I'm not thinking he's evil or anything because of this, but it felt like to some extent he was using his ties with me to gain notoriety in that community. At the very least, this...
Yeah, it's unfortunate, man. Some people like value that stuff like a little too much, like being a mod or some kind of thing. It's really weird, man. It's really bizarre.
Wasn't the type of person I wanted modding my server at the time, so my mind was made up and I wasn't going to give him his rank back. 2 weeks pass and Orion asks me for mod again, and I miss it the first time, so he asked again. I'm finally giving him a straight up no here, to which he in all caps says, "I will fuck your ass." And I'm trying to keep the conversation light but still get the message across, so I tell him no again to stop spamming and call him a nerd as an insult of affection after, kind of like he'd been doing through that conversation already. He still isn't understanding though and keeps telling me to give him mod aggressively, so I put it as straightforwardly as I could, stop asking. And only after that did Orion finally cut it out. This was roughly a week before that call in March 2018 where me and Orion fell out. And
I will say, and like hindsight's 2020, but it might have been more effective to like try to explain like, hey, listen, I'm trying to be more professional in some capacity, blah 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 blah. I'm sorry, it's not you personally, it's just that I'm trying to do things in a particular way. Nope, they're not entitled to that, but as a friend, that might have been a better communication. I doubt that Kwite like didn't say that it'd be like malicious. I'm sure that it was just kind of an oversight. You know what I mean? Especially when you're a smaller content creator and you're younger. So nothing crazy, but it could be a good idea to do something like that. It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea at all.
stop talking. Throughout this entire active situation, Orion has demonstrated a consistent pattern of lying. At one point in a tweet after releasing the initial twit longer, Orion said that I had deactivated my Discord account, but that luckily he got recordings of it, that I was deleting my side of all the messages. These recordings only showed that the Discord account he spoke with was mine and nothing else. I have no idea why Orion said this. He didn't show evidence for that claim, which isn't new, but it's so provably wrong that it's dumb to say if you aren't absolutely certain about it. I showed as much by posting a small update on my Discord server, just saying that I did not delete my account and that I was working on this statement. When Orion got caught being wrong on that, he changed the story to me apparently having used a bot to delete my side of all our Discord DMs, insinuating that I did so because I was trying to cover up the truth or I had something to hide. I don't know why he said that either, because it also isn't true. Orion still didn't prove it, and it's very easy to show that. When I go to mine and Orion's Discord DMs, the entire history of our messages is still there. It was all still accessible from my end before this whole thing, and it definitely will be after. I went ahead and archived the entire year plus of mine and Orion's Discord conversations, as well as all of the text messages we've ever sent each other. And you can look through all of them yourself at the link in the description. Some details in the messages are censored for obvious reasons, like both mine and Orion's personal information, as well as the names of people who are not a direct part of this. Orion claims that I kept most conversations we had to voice calls and to texting on Skype because messages deleted on there after a certain amount of time, implying that I was trying to not leave any kind of paper trail on purpose. This is part of Orion's attempts to paint what he alleges I did as premeditated, that how I behaved in all our interactions was to put him in a position where I could supposedly take advantage of Orion. What might surprise you is that alongside our texts and Discord DMs, I have also dumped all of our Skype messages that you can look through as well. Even if disappearing messages was the reason I had some apparent preference for Skype and not the major feature it had that Discord didn't at the time, video calling, the version of Skype we used back then didn't actually delete messages, it just stopped them from showing up in chat. The only messages that Skype would fully erase back then were the ones that got manually deleted by a user, and even then, it was only a sure thing if it was a text message. On older versions of Skype, the pictures you sent to other people and in group chats would save to a media cache on the recipient's local hard drive indefinitely. I managed to get all our messages and most of the images sent in that time frame together. I'll spare you the long version of the process, but if you want the details on how I got these so you can cross-reference the methods I used, they are on the screen for you to pause and read now, and will also be attached as a document in the file folder containing all these archived messages. The claim that I kept discussions to mostly voice calls is false as well. Throughout the entire time we talked, Orion was by far the one who initiated conversation the most. This would most often be in the form of messages asking if I was around, calling after I gave the affirmative, or calling being the first thing Orion did to reach out to me. Oftentimes, if I missed the first call because I was busy or otherwise didn't see the notification, Orion would call me several more times throughout the day, or even just one after another before finally moving on because I wasn't answering. Orion was in control of how we spoke at most points because he was the one starting most of the...
Bro, Ryan sounds like a really annoying fucking person. Probably very emotionally needy. That makes sense as to why he Kwite cut him off. See, that's what I'm saying. People are like, oh my god, they cut him off because Kwite got too famous. Nah, man, it's probably one of those things where he got older, he got popularity might have been part of it, but he got older, realized he had to be more professional, and he grew apart from somebody who clearly didn't have the same priorities as him. It's really not like this whole deep situation. Orion just seems like not a good person to be around. You know, some of that might be attributed to some kind of mental health issue, but at the end of the day, you know, you can only be so, you know, you can only do so much for other people's mental health, you know? You gotta prioritize number one first sometimes, brother.
Conversations in the first place. There are examples of me saying I'm only able to text and him requesting to call anyways. And despite that, I agree because he sounds like he's in distress and I'm trying to be there for a friend in whatever way they need me to. None of that is inherently bad on its own, and there's not a problem with preferring call or text, but to completely reverse the truth of the matter by saying I'm the one who actively preferred voice calls, framing it like I did that all intentionally as a master plan so there was no record of our...
Thank you so much, brother. I appreciate that. Did you want to say something with the message and you weren't able to do it? I can read it out loud for you if you want.
Discussions is complete fiction. Orion alleges that during the March 2018 call that during our fight, I called him a, quote, D-word who thinks she's a boy and will never be. In addition to this, Orion claims that he told me his dead name before we met up for the first time, only to be used around his transphobic parents to maintain his cover, but that after learning his dead name, I would apparently use it to belittle him. Both of these are false. Orion's old Twitter got suspended, unfortunately, so I could only ever recover my half of our conversations, but they are also available in the link in the description. But in every message I've sent to Orion on Discord, Skype, through text, or Twitter that I can still get my hands on, all of which you can look through yourself, you will not find a single instance of me, A, ever misgendering Orion at any point, or B, referring to him by a name other than Orion, as well as like the general gender-neutral words that I still use for everybody I know. While Orion...
What's their dead name? Probably something weird, like Bingus or something. But I wonder. Well, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. That's a dead name, but, you know, I don't know. You know? I mean, listen, even if Kwite did say something horrible like that, I probably wouldn't fault them too much. It's just a shitty thing young, edgy kids say to each other. And I'd be like, yeah, that's rude. It's like the same if like somebody fell out with me and called me a big fat fucking piece of shit, you know? Like I'd be like, well, that's mean. It is what it is, you know what I mean? So that sucks.
And did tell me his dead name. I have genuinely forgotten it since because I never used it outside of the context he told me to. I can only show you that I never did it in text, but I also never did it through voice calls or in person. In fact, the only person you'll see using an insult of this nature towards Orion is Orion himself. Orion would often go down depression spirals that he would end up messaging me during. And these usually turned into him doing a lot of negative self-talk, just disparaging himself in all sorts of ways that I would be trying my damnedest to walk him back from.
Yeah.
A lot.
I tried, but no, there's anything. Karma, I guess why do you think you deserve it? Because I'm a shit person, blah, blah, blah. Well, Ryan, you are a shit person. I wonder if this is actually them trying to, like, going through some kind of a struggle, or if it's just this Orion person sympathy baiting. I'm a bad person, so that you'll say, like, no, you're not. You're too hot to be a bad person, you know? Bingus. That's Orion's real name. Probably Saxon or something. Some kind of silly name. So, okay.
A lot of negative self-talk, just disparaging himself in all sorts of ways that I would be trying my damnedest to walk him back from. During one of these spirals in April 2017, almost a whole year before Orion claims I made the D word.
You should just be like, oh yeah, you are a shit person. So. It's like when you have, I think this is something that girls deal with more, but like when you have like skinny friends, like, oh, I feel so fat. Oh, I'm so fat today. Oh, I'm so fat and disgusting. Just say like, yeah, you are. Because if they're saying that about themselves for like a sympathy bait, like what do they think about you? You know what I mean? Like that's horrible. So
comment. He said a nearly identical thing about himself that
I'm some dumb ditch who wishes they had a pee-pee trying to pass off as a dude on the internet. Damn. You should try to pass off as a dude in the real world. It's probably more effective. But
immediately say is not true.
Well, actually, I guess
like,
it's easier to do on the internet. So, but whatever.
I was doing for every comment Orion made about himself before he called himself a D-word and continued trying to do until the end of the episode. And I was doing all of this no matter how many times Orion said something to try and shoot down my attempts at reassuring him. There is a single message that I could understand if you interpreted.
I understand why Kwite stopped being friends with this person. They're very exhausting.
As being derogatory or hurtful to Orion in the same way that the D-word or dead naming him would have been. And it's a message where I call him a Lebanese communist. That was followed up by me saying logic as in the rapper Rules with a Z, which I feel shows the tone of that conversation was not very serious.
Yeah, I mean, there's nobody would ever unironically say that logic rules, dude. What the frick? Like,
but the Lebanese part was not autocorrect or a typo, and using it in tandem with communist is important to the meaning. As the reason I said that specifically was because I had genuinely been hearing stuff about the real life and historical Lebanese Communist Party. Since it was something I'd consumed recently, my brain jumped to that as a silly sounding combo of words to a person who'd never heard it before. If you don't believe me, or that seems like a convenient cop-out to avoid...
Don't worry, I don't like Lebanese people, so you could be as racist as you... I'm just kidding, it's a joke. Okay.
Responsibility. I understand. It may seem like a stretch. But later in that same conversation, after Orion said that I like to bully him from the third person, my next message was saying that all he had on me was Asian slurs. If you don't know, I am half Filipino. Orion was aware of this, and it was not a super rare occurrence for Orion to refer to me as a or
half full of Pinot. I guess that means he's a half empty Pinot too, am I right? It depends on if you're an optimist or not. I'm so funny.
Make jokes about Asian stereotypes that were aimed at me. I thought there was more, but I couldn't find any in our Discord logs, just in the Skype chats, and I didn't get any screenshots back when we had these discussions, so I have no way of knowing if I'm misremembering, or if Orion might have gone back and scrubbed it at some point. It would just be speculating. But even at the time, mutual friends of ours would ask if I was bothered by Orion making Asian jokes about me as often as he did in voice calls. I say in those messages it bothered me some.
Really? They must have made Asian jokes like a lot.
If I was bothered by...
Hey, the Asian to the point, but not often. Damn. I mean, the good news for this Orion person is that they are actually a man, because men are very racist and they love saying racist things to their friends all the time. So, you know, at least you could take solace in being valid for your identity. Okay, so good. God bless for you on that one. Very interesting. Very muy interesado. Am I right, guys?
Orion making Asian jokes about me as often as he did in voice calls. I say in those messages it bothered me sometimes, but I want to make it very clear that I do not hold anything against Orion for these individual comments, or even as a whole. I was not very concerned by the...
Well, yeah, you're friends, so like that's a boundary you set. Like a lot of guys or people in friendly groups can be like jokingly racist to each other. At least in my friend groups. You know, so that's somewhat normal, so I wouldn't really like fault them for it. It's good of Kwite to bring that up and not try to like cancel them for being like a bad person, even though they've very clearly said not good things, right? But you know, that makes sense. At least there's that understanding.
Remarks about my ethnicity back then, and I'm still not today when looking in hindsight. In fact, Orion explicitly asked me if I was okay with him joking about it, and I told him directly that I was fine with it. Hell, if you go through our messages, you will definitely see me say some weird, edgy stuff that, even if it's taken out of context, is not something I'm proud of.
Let's see.
Go through our messages, you will definitely see me say...
My dad is out in town, Florida. He doesn't like black people and gays. And also you're black. Incredible. Jeez. It's pretty tame considering some stuff I've seen.
Some weird, edgy stuff that, even if it's taken out of context, is not something I'm proud of, especially when having to read it back. The reason I bring this up is to show how absurd it is for Orion to even raise this as a point against me. By the logic he used with slurs and bigoted action I've never actually even said or done, he would be guilty of the same thing. Not only are his claims of me being transphobic false, I would have been 17 at the time this happened, and it is hypocritical of Orion to try and condemn these comments he says I made in the manner that he did without mentioning the fact he also showed comparable behavior towards my immutable characteristics, ones he did not share with me. Orion says that we were close and would mutually confide in each other in ways that were beneficial to both of us. And while we did both confide things in each other, the idea that this was an equal dynamic and not heavily skewed in the direction of Orion dumping heavy emotions onto me is absurd. And the idea that we mutually benefited from it is completely ridiculous. I'm going to give another spoken content warning here because this subject matter in particular is grim. Warning for graphic discussions of self-harm, discussion of many forms of abuse, suicidal ideation, and topics in that vein. This is a hard one. Me and Orion have very different accounts of what I said to him when I cut him off. Orion claims I attacked him for immutable characteristics he couldn't control, like his gender identity, and I maintain to this day that I criticized his character and behavior and told Orion I was removing him from my life because of the way he acted. We do agree on one thing I said, though.
I mean, that makes sense to me. That second one. Walks like a duck, talks like a duck, am I right? It's probably what it is.
And it's that one of the reasons I gave to Orion for ending the friendship formally was that he was codependent towards me. I know he vouches for this because he mentioned it in that old video.
He proceeded to berate me and call me all kinds of really bad names and call me disgusting and too codependent.
I don't know. Those might be true, though. You might be a little, I don't know. I mean, I'm not friends with you, but you sound like a real shitty person I wouldn't want to be around. So maybe quite based, am I right?
And needy.
And he complained about it on his private Twitter the day after we fell out. When someone sees you as their best friend, typically they go to you first with their problems. That's not codependency, you absolute tool. Maybe to an extent.
That like almost literally is codependency. Well, I mean, it wouldn't just be on face value codependency, but if you have a lot of shit going on. If you're like overly attached, then yeah, for sure. Let's see, an emotional and a behavioral condition that affects an individual's ability to have a healthy, mutually satisfying relationship. Now, I mean, this seems like an actual diagnosis, but it seems like it's like, like a relationship addiction almost. That could be true. So, yeah, okay.
That's true. I think it's a nuanced thing, but that's just not what Orion was doing. On February 2nd in 2018, before we met up that month, there was a conversation me and Orion had that I feel encapsulated the nature of our friendship and how Orion viewed me over the course of it. We had a short text exchange where I said I was busy prepping for a podcast I was about to stream and that I had a video to edit afterwards, so I didn't really have the free time to hang. I let Orion know I was busy and I got back to it. A few hours later, I'm wrapped up with the podcast and Orion hits me with, "Hey, can I ask you something?" Apparently the thing that brought this on was that when Orion listened to the podcast that day, the conversation I had with the guest sounded too good. Essentially, I had gotten along with them so well that it made Orion...
Wait, what? You're in the podcast, it kind of hurt because you and Sub had a better conversation than I can. I don't feel good enough. You deserve so much more. Oh, dude. I would never be this person's friend. Oh, how unbearable. I don't know, bro. Considering, like, listen, these two... Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm these two seem to have, like, a somewhat complicated relationship, right? Like, in the past, they were intimate in some capacity. They were relationship-ish. It seems like Orion was pushier and wanted to be in the relationship more. There were definitely boundary crossings, but I would chalk a lot of it up to being young and, not asserting boundaries well on one hand and like pushing past boundaries in another end. But this comes off as manipulative to me, with all the context or the pretext that we have here. Like, it just, I've already gotten the feeling that this Orion person just kind of sympathy baits by constantly weaponizing their mental health, and this feels like that. Like, you had such a good conversation with them, and we don't have those, and I wish you deserve so much more than me. And it's like, damn, like that just feels like that's draining. That's like an emotional leech at this point. That's how I interpret it. Just with all the pretext, this is crazy. It's obnoxious. Like, how annoying.
The conversation I had with the guest sounded too good. Essentially, I had gotten along with them so well that it made Orion scared I wouldn't be his friend anymore. In other words, the sight of me having...
Orion didn't think that at all. God bless you, Kwite, for actually believing that. Orion's manipulating you in that message, and even looking back, you don't realize it. That's fucking crazy.
Other friends, or even being friendly with other people, came off to Orion as a threat to our friendship. A message like that can get me worried, as I'm sure it does for a lot of folks. So I tell him to go ahead, and he asks, "Am I important to you? Genuinely. I'm not being passive-aggressive. I just need to know." You can point out that Orion specified he was acting genuinely, but this is not the setup for a scenario where if these are real concerns around the topic, you'd be getting sincere or untainted answers about about it. I was already worried Orion was in a bad spot, so when he asked a question of self-doubt like this, even if I did feel the way he fears, I was scared of what would happen if I said it and felt guilty for even considering it. I'm trying to reassure him that I do care for him because it was the truth at the time, even if it had been waning in recent months. When questions like this came up, Orion was very prone to start spiraling and saying awful things about himself. So my knee-jerk reaction was to think he was in distress. A fair assumption because he explicitly confirmed it in the very next line. He goes on to say he is loathing himself and isn't sure if he matters. In that situation where it has been made clear I was talking to someone in a vulnerable state, I was scared of what would happen if I did anything other than try to reassure him. The setup was basically saying, I don't feel any value.
Are you trolling me right now? Papa, I still believe Orion still, because they posted proof they could have had undiagnosed mental health issues while her and Kwite were together, and Kwite took advantage of that unknowingly. How can you take advantage of... You have to be... You're trolling me, right, man? How do you take advantage of something unknowingly? Like, I just don't think that that's true. How do you assign some kind of, like, at worst, even if he took advantage of that, I would say that's just inappropriate behavior because it wasn't intentional. Like, you can unintentionally take advantage of people if they don't, like, set hard boundaries, I guess. But them having a mental issue doesn't excuse it. They seem like an asshole. Like, okay, them having a mental issue, that's their problem. I mean, I know that's rude, but oh, you are trolling. I fucking hate you. I knew you were trolling too. I gotta stop. I gotta stop taking you seriously. You guys are goblins. Okay.
In myself about this thing, so I need you to constantly reassure me about it so I can keep feeling it from somewhere. And I wasn't sure if this person I know can be a danger to himself was going to do something drastic if I didn't fill that role. In the right amounts and in hard times, it is natural and okay to lean on your friends to support you. I did it all throughout these last few weeks because having my face plastered everywhere against my will with the false label of rapist immediately attached to it is emotionally taxing. Go figure. But with Orion, it was a continuous thing. He'd ask if the good things I'd said about him applied to him now so he could hear me say it again. He would then express his insecurity again, which would prompt me to reassure him more. And then he asked if he can be selfish, which I'd argue he was already being, but I give the go-ahead because I'm seeing Orion in emotional distress. And the thought of saying no made me feel guilty and scared of what would happen if I did. They'd go on to say that they don't feel good enough and that they think I deserve so much more. And after everything they have just told me, I am not going to tell a person saying these things that they're right. I'm already shit scared something bad will happen.
I would if I felt that way because I don't care. Like I'm not like I dated somebody who would like oh, I'm going to kill myself if you break up with me. So it's like at this point I would just be like, okay, do it. I don't want somebody to do that. But like that's just holding somebody emotionally hostage. So
even when I'm trying to say these positive things about them, I felt pressure to give the same validation I've had to multiple times this conversation and before it. Orion would repeat the same line, put himself down, saying others are more deserving of my time, which left it to me to build him back up all over again. Orion said he was scared of losing me, a fear again that he said came from just seeing me with other friends, or worse, that he was keeping me back, framing himself as a burden. And so here I am, once again in a corner where I have to emotionally prop Orion so he can feel validated externally where he doesn't feel it internally. I kept trying to convince him I care and said that I feel guilty for not talking to him more, and looking back, that's not good. That is a problem. Guilt should not have been what was driving me to make myself interact with somebody. It should have been a genuine want to interact with them. It's having a good time with somebody versus feeling like you owe them your time, where if you don't give it to them, you feel like a bad person. The conversation continued along those lines until Orion just straight up says, I care so much about you and I would be next to nothing without you. Orion hinged his sense of self-worth on what I say to him, and as a result would rely on me to provide validation that he couldn't find within himself. That is so unbelievably toxic because now I've been made responsible for another person's sense of self-worth. If I leave, I feel like the asshole because Orion told me how much he needed me and I'd be proving the fears he trusted me.
Thank you so much for the large gut. Haugesel? What is that? I don't know. Anyway, the Papa 2022 chair compilation, I'll have to hire an editor, okay? Don't worry.
And that I said weren't true to actually be correct all along. Even though any of the commitments of never leaving or assurances of us still being friends were made when I was speaking with someone I was afraid might hurt themselves if I hadn't done that. That is emotionally draining on any person and honestly borders on abusive. That conversation was towards the end of our time talking to each other, but it was by no means new. Behavior like this came up early and throughout the whole year before I finally found the will to do something about it and cut off Orion. This type of codependent behavior was a recurring thing. I'm going to be hitting on a broad timeline over the year we knew each other because if I covered every instance of this happening like I did those last messages, it would take a while. And honestly, I don't have a great time going through and reliving these any more than I've had to already. Orion's pattern of oversharing personal and intense topics started in our earliest conversations. He mentioned being annoyed by his dad very often in one of our first exchanges. Then after barely talking for the next month, only starting to speak regularly in the few weeks after that, and only having known each other for 2 months total by then, Orion came to me in distress saying he felt like he needed to come clean to me about something and that he didn't have anyone else. That put me on edge. It seemed heavy and I'm apparently this person's only option. I'm thinking that if I'm not there, then he's got no one else. So I tried to be an ear for him even if we barely knew each other. Orion then trauma dumped about his self-harm this early into knowing me and told me he relapsed that night and he hated himself for it. I am flailing to comfort him despite having
sounds like a skill issue to me, you know what I'm saying? That's all I'm saying, bro.
No idea how to do this kind of thing. And since he had said I was the only person he had to go to, it felt like I had to leave the door open for him to feel comfortable reaching out to me again. Otherwise, in the future, Orion might just hurt himself instead. A few days later, and I hear more and more about how Orion doesn't get along with his parents, until eventually Orion vented to me about how Days later, and I hear more and more about how Orion doesn't get along with his parents, until eventually Orion vented to me about how controlling his mom was and wouldn't let Orion do anything ever. Orion was berating himself here as if he was uniquely bad for having the reactions he does, and that was when I started first sharing deeper than surface level personal stuff. I was trying to relate to Orion in some way so he felt less alone in his pain. I would not usually talk about these things with someone I knew this little, but this is someone I've known for 2 months who my most notable interactions with were him being very distressed and defaulting to me for help. I felt like it was the only thing I could do to try and get Orion to stop spiraling on an issue like that. Just a month after that, Orion told me he was being physically abused by his parents and described it in detail. Coming out about abuse and asking for help is not something to discourage, but it's a lot
to this point that they're making. What's weird, I have trouble, not trouble like believing it, but a little bit, maybe I'm biased. When I was younger, I had a girlfriend who told me that her mom like hit her, and so I moved her out of the house, right? Like, I mean, like, what else am I supposed to do? I got her out of the house, you know. And years later, when she moved back in, she was like, "Oh, she didn't actually hit me. She threw a paper towel roll at my head." And so, you know, I don't know. This person seems like that kind of manipulative person that would lie about these things. You know, I'm not saying that it was a lie. I'm just saying that this person gives me similar vibes, like the kind of person that kind of plays up every issue that they have, and they may not be as honest about what's going on in their life. So, I'm just saying.
By his parents and described it in detail. Coming out about abuse and asking for help is not something to discourage, but it's a lot at once for anybody, especially when it's coming from someone I've only known for at most 3 months. Orion even acknowledges this in the conversation while I'm trying to ease his mind about how it's affecting me. I was trying to make sure he didn't feel guilty for reaching out and then would potentially leave to go do something drastic. Orion did warn me this was a heavy subject matter before venting about it, but after learning he was being physically hit minutes earlier and are actively distressed now, I'm even more scared than usual that Orion might hurt himself if I didn't stay with him. So I said yes and tried to be there for Orion until he was out the other side. Another week passed and Orion messaged me frantically. He says his parents were hurting him again, and I am in panic mode because after knowing this person for only the last few months, he is suddenly ideating suicide in front of me. Orion was describing the method they used, calling himself a coward for not going through with it. He said he wished he was more suicidal like normal people so that he could just go through with them. Orion's telling me no one would miss him, not even me, all while I'm trying to fight back against every single one of these things.
Oh, right there. No one would miss me, not even you. Bro, that just sounds so manipulative. I don't know. This person just seems too much like my toxic ex. Jesus. Okay. Well, you know. It's fucking crazy.
Every time I tried to tell Orion he has inherent value and it's still worth living and that people cared about him, Jesus. Orion would shoot it down. He would tell me that I
can't believe Kwite would lie to that person like that. I'm just kidding. That's mean. That was a weird laugh. I sound like a chipmunk. What was that? Jesus. What the fuck? I got problems, man. I got no value in my laugh anymore.
Wouldn't miss him for long, even though I'm pouring my heart out trying to show him otherwise. I hate having to read these back now. I had my own mental health issues that I didn't deal with well at the time. And on top of that, I was now stressing that my friend was going to kill himself if I'm not there when he says he needs me. I felt trapped, like there were no other options but to try and help this person whenever he asked, because otherwise I might be leaving him to die. In comparison, the time it took me to open up about personal issues was much longer after I had already been through multiple of Orion's vulnerable moments, and often only in response to Orion describing these same issues first, in an effort for me to try and show him he wasn't alone in what he was going through. Early on, Orion would offer to talk with me about stuff like this, and I would thank him, but still outright deny his help. I've always been more cagey and contained about talking about these issues in regards to myself, and it wasn't until...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's somewhat normal, is that people will usually keep stuff, and like, you shouldn't necessarily keep stuff to yourself. You know, you should be able to have somebody that you trust to talk about to when it comes to your struggles and stuff. That's a very healthy thing to do, like properly venting. But I think that people who are too quick to complain about issues, to me, I don't know. I see a lot of times, I think, specifically, like in this instance, somebody that they barely know, he barely knows. It comes off as ingenuine. I have a hard time believing that like they have these issues because I feel like it's hard. It's hard to open up about like having abusive parents or having these types of ideations. So to me, and I'm not saying always, but in this instance, I wouldn't doubt that it's grossly overstated. So I really wouldn't doubt that.
Early April 2017, when I first really vented and went back and forth with Orion. It was over a very graphic discussion about self-harm, which I have censored here. It is both personal and grim, so I don't want to show the details. But Orion gave genuinely helpful advice on how to try and not self-harm again, and I really appreciated it. I did, for sure, trust Orion with some personal issues in parts of my life. I would talk to him about it fairly regularly, but it was never absolute. I always talked with multiple friends about my issues, some who could directly relate, others who couldn't. At times, Orion would be worried about me, or I asked him if he was free, but he'd be in the middle of something. And even...
You know what's really sad, bro? I know this is so sad. I just feel like now I feel like venting to you guys. I had a friend that I had met on TikTok. I'm not gonna say who it is, and we used to be good friends, and we just don't talk anymore. And I found out the other day that they like unfollowed me on like my TikTok and Instagram and stuff. This is a little while ago I found out. Maybe a few months ago. And I was kind of hurt because like we would talk. And you know what the shitty part about it though is that every time we would talk, it would be about how like they were struggling with some kind of like mental issue, which I get it, you know. But like I never really talked about my struggles. And there was even a time where the person was like, "Oh, I don't know if I'm gonna have somewhere to live." And I'm like, "Oh, you can come live here for a while." Like I was like, you know, it was chill. And then like that was it, man. I guess I don't know if I had a take that they didn't like or something or what, and it was just it. That was it. They're fucking unfollowed me and shit. I was like, damn. You know? Like it kind of hurt, you know? And it felt shitty. And I don't think that the person's a bad person, but like it felt shitty because like, oh, the only time we would talk a lot about this person's just like mental health struggles. Every once in a while, and that was cool. But we never really talked about me or anything. I don't know. It felt a little one-sided, and then just to like throw it away. And they're a nice guy. Like I'm not trying to say like they're a terrible person or anything. It was just kind of shitty, bro. I don't know, man. It's unfortunate. Like the friends that I don't know. Maybe I just struggle making friends sometimes. It's just tough shit, man. Stuff.
When he said he dropped what he was doing and tried to convince me to get on a call and talk about it that instant, I would shut it down because if I wasn't going through all-consuming stress and matter could wait, I wanted to balance going to Orion for support while making sure I wasn't monopolizing his time. This dynamic continued at different levels of intensity and frequency where I was an emotional crutch for Orion. And while I still confided things in him, I was still in general a lot more reserved about it and more likely to manage my struggles on my own or in ways outside of going to Orion.
Am I talking about Ethan Klein? No. What? You're fucking weird, bro. No. We were never friends. We were mutuals on TikTok. We weren't like actual friends. You think Ethan? I know you're trolling. I don't know why I'm even responding to you.
These types of conversations became less common as 2017 went on and were at their lowest from around November 2017 all the way till the end of our friendship in that March. Part of this was because I was genuinely more busy giving one last try at making YouTube work before college, and over time I had been consistently growing into a healthier headspace and becoming more self-confident. All that, and now with a tangible goal I was striving towards, I had focus. Orion claims that his ability as an artist got him in more YouTube circles than me at one point, and that I would ask him to add me to said circles, which he would agree to do for me because I was his friend.
Yeah, I remember that. And then Kwite got too big for me and stopped talking to me. But it's like, even if that's true, it like you're assigning intentionality. What's more likely, if this is even true, which sounds like it probably isn't true, is like, oh, I had some YouTube friends in YouTube circles, and like I was hanging out with people, and I had a friend Kwite, and he was like, oh, can you introduce me to these people? And I did. And then we just happened to fall out afterwards. But based on the fact that I made a joke before, like that if this person met somebody at like a book signing, they would think that they're best friends with that person. I wouldn't doubt that like this individual would just assume that everybody they've met once is a friend. And if you're annoying enough, honestly, people will just kind of put up with you. And then like it happens. If you notice, people that are most annoying at your job, they get the most concessions because people just don't want to deal with it. And so this Orion person just seems like the kind of person that just annoys the shit out of people relentlessly and then just gets what they want because they're so annoying. It's not like worth putting up with them. And they interpret that as friendship when they're not. And they probably also, and I might be wrong about this, but they seem like they might also just like trauma dump onto everybody they meet anyway as like a sympathy play. So, you know, bro, okay. I mean, I doubt that they even had like these robust connections in the first place.
He alleges that as I grew myself and made my own connections, the relationship grew transactional. Again, the only thing—
Hey, you're 100 pounds down from your biggest. That's awesome, man. Congratulations.
Orion gave here for me to address is his word, so I'll do my best to demonstrate that this was not the case. Throughout the time I knew him, during these depression spirals that Orion would often fall down, he spoke of how he was afraid of me leaving or saying that I was better off without him. At the time, he would say this was because I deserved better and that I would leave him once I eventually realized that. Every time this came up, I tried to reassure Orion of his value as a friend, not in terms of worthiness or what he could do for me, but because he was a unique individual who I got on with, someone who I enjoyed spending my time with, and because of that, I chose to continue spending time with. He would usually shoot these comments down, but I always advocated that Orion value himself as an individual, instead of putting himself down and acting as if me choosing to be around him was what gave him value. I never thought of doing something for Orion in terms of, well, I did this for him recently, but what has he done for me lately? When I said no to things that Orion asked for, or wanted to do things a certain way without him, it wasn't a matter of transaction, it was because that was how I genuinely felt on the matter. Orion would sometimes try to bargain when I denied him things, and I almost never took him up on it, and when I did, it would be usually to make the conversation stop. For example, if you buy my snacks, I'll kiss you. You don't want that, do you? If I let you buy the plush? You owe me a kiss, being glaring examples. It happened with smaller stuff too. When I had that weekly podcast, Orion really wanted to be on it. But quite frankly, he was just not the type of person I was trying to have on the podcast at the time. So when he asked, I said no. After that, Orion said he'd make an animation for me if I let him on the podcast. I told him if he did do that, I would very much appreciate it, and that he absolutely didn't have to, but regardless, it wouldn't change my answer. There are things from the Twitlonger itself that show the same mindset from Orion. Like when he says he made my character stills for free, and I only used them maybe once. If Orion had an expectation that because he made the sprites for free, I was meant to use them on the regular as a form of repayment, that was never communicated to me. I even tried to compensate Orion at the time, which they denied.
That's like when somebody, like a fan, makes me like nice art, and they're like, I mean, nobody's ever made me art and expected me to use it or anything. But like, imagine somebody made like art and they're like, oh, here, I'm gonna make this, you have to use it. Like, why, bro? Chill out. You know what I mean? That's fucking unhinged behavior. It's like self-important behavior. It's like this desperation to attach yourself to somebody else's success through like a very weak means. You know, like I said, I've been there before. It's just kind of embarrassing, you know? I think it's good if you discover your own self-worth, you know?
And saying talking to them was compensation. If using the sprites was the expectation for them getting made, I probably wouldn't have agreed to Orion making them at all, because I would not have committed to any promises of if the art would get used in my videos or not. It isn't that I didn't appreciate Orion's willingness to make those for me, it's that when it came to making content, I wasn't going to use Orion's work.
No, I don't think I'll ever bring back a P.O. box. I don't think so. Too expensive.
If it didn't fit what I was going for. In my head,
what are you going to send me? What are you going to send me? Maybe I'll make one if you tell me what you're going to send me. It's like $60 a fucking, or $120 a year.
Were never a transaction that I was meant to fulfill my side of, but rather something I would implement in my content if it made sense to do so. If Orion felt I owed him something for the work, I would have much rather paid him so that no matter if I used the sprites or not, he would have gotten something for his time regardless. On top of this, Orion spent a weird amount of time taking credit for parts of my success before ever detailing the alleged assault. Because he didn't use
Yeah, I've been there too. It's very weird. Some people think that they had so much to do with your success. It's very bizarre. Oftentimes, the people who will try to claim your success the most are the least successful people. That they think that they had like just such a profound impact, and I don't know why that is. I think that people just have this feeling of self-importance. You know, like I personally, you know, will sometimes put myself down a little too much about like how my success, even though I'm doing pretty well. And I think that just comes from like me having a higher standard of what success means to me, which I think a lot of people have. I'm sure that like a lot of people in my audience have, but some people have such a low standard of success that they think that like ridiculous things are like, oh, this is so big and successful and this and other thing. And it's like, dude, like, you know, I don't know. It's so hard to communicate, bro. I'm just identifying with a few things here. You're sending me thick lady bust statue. Oh shit. Maybe. I might, if you're going to send me something like that, maybe. Okay. Only because I like that. That sounds pretty dope, you know? That sounds pretty pogger.
Use his face in his videos. I thought he would have an easier time if I drew him and recommended he wore sunglasses and a face mask instead of manually keying his face out with a black box. There, I essentially came up with his Sona with him and drew various talk sprites. That whole section has almost no basis in reality. This is a deleted video of mine from 2016 celebrating 500 subscribers.
How y'all doing? Hello and welcome to my 500 subscriber special. As you can see, I put in a lot of effort to ensuring that the audio quality of this video is top notch.
The time and milestone I hit a month before ever first speaking with Orion. There's even older, though still now deleted, examples of me appearing as the exact character Orion drew in those sprites. It isn't something he could have come up with either. I have the original hoodie I used to use here. It was an old brand that had both a hood and a turtleneck that you could pull up to cover your face. It came like this. And the sunglasses were $1 pair somebody had left behind in the band room at school one day. My whole look as Kwite was me hodgepodging it together as I went along.
Aren't kids crazy? Yeah, Death Noodles made me true. Aren't kids crazy, man? You'll find like the most random thing and it just presents so much value to you. I found a fucking pair of sunglasses in the band room or whatever, and that became part of my identity. Oh my god, that's crazy.
To try and figure out the best way of hiding my face in a convenient way. The black boxes Orion says I manually keyframed in my videos were because the turtleneck on the hoodie was thick and it made the audio quality awful. So sometimes I'd pull down the mask while speaking on camera so my voice could be heard better, and I would do the work to cover up my face again in post. The fix for this was switching to thinner surgical masks, yes, but Orion did not give me the idea for that either, like he claims, and he definitely didn't do so at the time those character sprites were made.
I can't believe Kwite was hogging up all the surgical masks during COVID. That's the real cancellation. Am I right?
I used the turtleneck as a mask until late 2017. It is still in the thumbnail of my oldest public video. Like I said, this was the time right before I went into my final semester of high school, so I decided to knuckle down and give making videos as a job one last go. Because of that, I figured out a less cumbersome and audio-wrecking way to hide my face since I'd be in the outfit more frequently. I even explained this in the first ever video where you see me using a surgical mask in late 2017.
And as usual, I refuse to show my actual face in a face cam video. This time I think I found a way to not sound like I'm being waterboarded. I bought a bunch of these surgical masks, and now I can get slightly less acne on my chin because this thing is 1,000 times thinner than my turtleneck.
I don't really know why Orion decided decided to take credit for something like this. It's just untrue, and it adds nothing to his stance, much less the other far more serious allegations he made about me in that twit longer. It reads to my
Yeah, true. It's so weird when people like come after you for an allegation. They feel the need to put like 17,000 things in there as well. It's very bizarre.
my biased self as more instances where he felt he was owed credit for some part of my success. In fact, Orion describes our dynamic overall in a way where no matter what I did, it was always in order to get something I wanted out of Orion. He said, while I won't say I was the most stable person at the time, I was not actively unkind. I cannot say the same for him. When my abandonment issues would arise, he would leave me ignored, and then when I was having the worst of my time, he would swoop in to save me and keep me under his thumb. He would yell at me or act passive-aggressive towards me when being my friend was inconvenient, but love bomb me when it was just us or he needed something from me. Again, you can read
Buzzwords! Grooming love bond. You like those words? Those are my favorite. Those are some buzzwords nowadays, baby. Buzzwords.
all of our interactions. You can decide how you feel about them for yourself if you feel the need to. But here it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. When I wasn't speaking with or replying to Orion, it means I was playing off his abandonment issues. But when I saw him in what seemed like severe distress and dropped whatever I was doing to try and support him, then I'm manipulating Orion by only being there for him at his worst. And trying to counter his negative self-talk is now love bombing.
It sounds more like Kwite was keeping their distance, but then this person would be like, I'm going to take my own life if you don't respond. And they're like, okay, I guess I got to respond. That's how I would interpret it. That sounds more than anything else. I couldn't get his attention, so I would used to threaten myself until he would respond. That's how he was manipulating me. The reality is it's probably more likely that this person was manipulating him.
Phrase that I'd only lather on when I wanted something from Orion. On the whole, it didn't matter if I was present or not. In hindsight for Orion, there was nothing I did right in any situation. Orion
That's why I don't like to be present. I like to be gifted.
claims that a few months after the alleged rape, when I started gaining subscribers and making larger YouTube friends, is when I began to ghost him more often, all while he was having a BPD episode. Orion says that I eventually called to cut him off, and in that call is where I apparently made transphobic comments that in part almost left him institutionalized. Firstly, if Orion was having a BPD episode during that time, it must have been a trial and a very hard thing to go through. But there was absolutely no way for me to have known that. And again, it was barely 1 month between seeing him in February and cutting him off, not several. I had been ghosting Orion more often over months, but this started well before any of my major success on YouTube, all the way back in November 2017.
Even if it did happen during YouTube, well, first of all, even if it happened because they were becoming a bigger YouTuber and they were an asshole, I still wouldn't care because it's literally irrelevant. I don't care if you're kind of a dick, but it doesn't even matter if it was during the time of like getting bigger. Because like that could have just been like a wake up call. You're making moves to be a better person, and then you see like somebody that's holding you back in some capacity, and they're toxic for you, they're not helpful. So you're like, I got to cut this person off. Like it's perfectly normal behavior. You have to learn to do that as a person, or you're going to be taken advantage of your entire life. You have to learn to set boundaries. It is what it is, man.
This was a genuine mix of me being busy from knuckling down on YouTube, but I was also spending time with other people, both online and in real life. People who I genuinely enjoyed being around and whose company made the time I spent with them better. But with Orion, our friendship had been marked in my mind by trauma and intense emotions, me stressing over if he'll be okay over all sorts of things that I can't do anything but worry about, and always trying to be there for him, even when it never felt like what I did was enough because nothing ever changed. I drifted away from talking to Orion because it was taking its toll on me. It stretched my fraying mental health even thinner than it already was, something that Orion knows I had my own struggles with. March 2018 was definitely when I was ignoring Orion the most, an amalgam of being genuinely happier around other people, little things Orion had done stacking up over time that made me less eager to talk to him, and just general anxiety over how our conversations usually went. It came to a head the day that call took place. In the back of my mind, I knew I'd made the decision to remove Orion from my life because I felt happier and healthier in the moments away from him. But I still don't know how to talk to him about it, or quite frankly, how he'd take it. As I came to know him...
You don't really have to, honestly. You can just stop talking to the person. Just like that friend did to me. I guess they didn't talk to me about it. It is what it is, man. It's still upsetting, but what are you going to do?
Orion was a volatile person. I'd seen him have extreme reactions to extreme things happening to him, and I got too anxious to do it. I froze up and didn't speak to Orion at all for just a few days. In those days, it was Orion's constant messages across multiple apps, pleading with me to just talk with him and to just say if he did something wrong, as well as a mutual friend of ours shooting me a DM about how badly Orion was dealing with this, that eventually pushed me into giving Orion a call to at least try and explain my reasoning. My logic was that Orion had called me that day already, so I'd just be returning a missed call. Plus, he literally asked me to tell him if he did something wrong, so he must be at least open to listening. And while I can't narrow it down to one event that made me drift away, I could at least tell him honestly what I was feeling and try to close this chapter in both our lives in a productive manner. While in that call, I did my best to maintain a level head and communicate to Orion what I was feeling and my reasoning for wanting to move on from him, like he had asked me to. But I never got a chance to express that fully or in the way I wanted, because Orion would talk over what I was trying to say, often immediately denying what I said before I could finish. And then he'd shoot back with his own criticisms of my character. At one point, Orion said he'd noticed a pattern of me distancing myself from my old friends, and that it wasn't just him seeing it, but mutual friends of ours too. Again, I never had any of this said to me by either of the people mentioned, especially not Kappa. I'd never said anything anything transphobic during that call, and I did not go in guns blazing. I tried to go in on good faith to close this thing out like Orion seemed like he wanted to as well. Still, that doesn't change that it did.
Yeah, it sounds like it's possible. Well, it's possible that those friends just didn't want to express that to Kwite, but it's also possible that Orion's lying and trying to make it seem like Kwite's crazy, right? Like, it's like, oh, I'm not the only one that like has felt this way. Like, are you sure you want to distance yourself from being a friend with me? Because it sounds like you actually have a problem where you're not being friends with anybody. And it's like, this is a bad behavior that you're exhibiting. Like, you actually need to be my friend, kind of like that kind of a thing. Kind of comes off like that a little bit. But, that's just based on what we know about this person. This Orion person is just kind of unfortunate. I do kind of feel bad for them. I mean, they leveraged what I would say is a false accusation based on what we have here. But I feel bad for them because it doesn't seem like they have any genuine friendships or relationships. It doesn't really seem like they have the capacity to create a relationship with somebody in a healthy manner, and they need to really work on that, or they're just never going to be happy. Because I don't know, I wouldn't doubt that there's a pattern of people not wanting to be around you. It is what it is, man. So, unfortunate stuff, but hey, what are you going to do? I got to kill this. Oh.
Spiral out of control, so I eventually ended the call because I had gone in attempting to try and be productive, and it became clear that wasn't going to happen. I didn't get to complete my thoughts. I'd failed to maintain a setting where any good was going to get done, and I wasn't planning on going back on my decision, so I denied Orion's request to try again with a mediator. If what I went through during the friendship wasn't enough, Orion's actions...
A fucking mediator? Holy shit. What?
So I denied...
Can we try talking again with a mediator? Oh, you guys are friends, not fucking husband and husband. What the hell? A fucking mediator. Jesus Christ.
Orion's request to try again with a mediator. If what I went through during the friendship wasn't enough, Orion's actions in the days, weeks, months, and at this point years following that call have only made me more certain that I made the right choice ejecting this person from my life. The day after, March 21st, Orion took it hard. And that was understandable. It's not easy losing a friend you felt close to, and I can sympathize with that. But on his private account at Lego Hentai, which is the same vent account Orion has to this day,
Lego Hentai? Is that a thing? Oh no, you guys gotta stop giving me ideas. Oh no. Is that a real thing? No, okay. Well, that's an improv. I don't even need to explore this option. What is happening? I'm an animal, dude. I did say Minecraft stuff one time, and I was like, damn, this is weird. Dude. Why is this is actually kind of decent. I don't even like Minecraft, bro. It's crazy. I'm a degenerate, man. I got problems. I got problems, bro. I got problems.
He said things that I feel were uncalled for, out of proportion, and I feel somewhat malicious in nature. After I removed myself from the incredibly toxic dynamic we had been operating on, everything I ever entrusted Orion with, or he helped me through, became ammunition to fire back at me. I'm just so pissed and hurt I was so supportive of you. I helped you beat self-harm. I helped you with 2 boyfriends. Supported you even before you got big. Met you in real life twice, and then you throw it in my face. Everything Orion had supported me through was now framed as something he had done for me. He helped me with self-harm. He helped me with bad breakups. Orion did those things for me, so how could I dare do this to him? It had become an almost entirely transactional relationship. He aired this out to people on his private account who I didn't know and directly attached my name to these traumas I had leaned on him for. Not long after that, I approached Kappa and asked him if he had actually said those things about observing me drift away from people in the way Orion said he did. And as you know, he confirmed to me that he didn't, and he was not happy about Orion using his name in that way to try and corner me into feeling like I was in the wrong for attempting to escape the situation I was in with Orion. Orion messaged Kappa a few days later saying I had backstabbed him and asked him if they could still be friends. In the Tusk video, Orion framed Kappa's response as a result of me having talked to him already, and while I was the first to talk to Kappa, he was also just not happy with the way his name had been invoked, where Orion used it dishonestly to try and get a one-up on me. Kappa sent Orion a response condemning his actions and saying that from his outside perspective of watching me and Orion, that he had observed essentially the same behaviors that made me want to remove Orion from my life, and that you can also see demonstrated throughout all of our conversations. On his vent account, roughly a week and a half after the call, Orion continued talking not about the loss of friendship that he mourns, but what he had the power to do to me. I really wish I didn't have the power I have. I know I'm not going to do anything, but I could. I very well could do so fucking much and it would ruin everything for him. But I won't, and I'm a little conflicted with how I feel about it.
Wow. That almost, it's like almost completely explicit about how they could weaponize a fake accusation against them. How crazy. That's nutty bars. Nutty bars. Nutty bars. Nut bars. Sorry, I keep saying the same thing.
Some might say this could be in regard to something big that would ruin me. Perhaps even the assault he claims I committed now. But by Orion's own account of things, both his old and his new one, that is impossible. The tweet was made about a week and a half after our call, and Orion said he didn't realize he had been raped until after the fact in his own twit longer. And he told people asking in DMs that it took a year with his current therapist to realize it as well. The inner conflict Orion mentioned having showed itself in the following tweets, where he vented about how I ruined the good memories, that I snatched this away from him when he most needed it, and I believe tellingly that he still wished we were friends. And despite saying he'd do nothing, Orion went on to do a lot after that. On my 18th birthday, barely 2 months into me doing anything notable on YouTube, this YouTuber named Progress dropped a 40-minute video dogging on me over whatever he could think of. Orion and Progress got their old Twitter account suspended, so it's hard to find the receipts going all the way back, but Orion went on to contact and befriend him, as well as many other people who had shared some general disdain or negative opinion of me publicly. That is petty, but on its own, not really a big deal. The thing is, Orion was sharing his version of events to several smaller channels to use as content for videos, and his targets didn't just stop at me, the person he apparently had the most issues with. After Kappa found some success of his own, Orion leaked parts of their interactions as well to paint what Kappa had said to him as needlessly mean and harsh, even though the folks making these videos had no way to know the full context of why he said that. This Danarchy guy privated all his videos, but he had made one on Kappa in the past using those messages he sent to Orion as part of his arguments. In Tusk's video, you can also see that in the section he dedicated to Kappa, when he shows them on screen, he says he got the screenshots from a Danarchy video about Kappa. And Orion was in contact with Danarchy at some point, as well as being the person to originally leak the messages Kappa had sent him back in March. Also in those following months, I heard from multiple friends on calls that Orion had approached them in DMs to try and convince them that mainly me, but also Kappa at times, were awful people for dropping him from our lives, and that they should stop talking to me because of how big of an asshole I am. I had a friend approach me as late as July of 2018 showing Orion had messaged them out of nowhere, trying to be friends and to convince them I was a horrible person. They said they didn't buy it or enjoy Orion slandering me, so they made me aware, which I greatly appreciated. And through all the parts that directly concerned me, I chose not to acknowledge or respond to any of it. It was small instances of people saying I was a horrible person in small corners of the public, but mostly in private, always without substantiating it, so it ultimately didn't matter and wouldn't have to affect me if I did my best not to let them. I wouldn't give Orion the attention he wanted and definitely didn't deserve, and I kept on moving forward. Orion did not. He tried to harm my reputation publicly, but somewhat anonymously, and it didn't change much. He tried in private to convince my friends I was a terrible person, and from what I know, it didn't do much either. As previous attempts to get a public reaction or outburst from me failed, as his attempts to ruin my friendships with others failed, Orion continued to escalate his methods. Things were quiet for a time until late August, early September 2018, when I got word that Orion was gonna appear in a video to give testimony of how I treated him. That video being the Tuxpicious video. In it, you might remember that Orion shared he had tons of my personal details. He outed me for having self-harmed, thus publicly weaponizing my personal struggles against me, and eventually this culminated into the final call we ever had in mid-September 2018, which had a mediator present. And before we move forward, I need to take the time to address the act.
Wait, this resulted in actually getting the mediator that they wanted? That's fucking really weird. I thought that... Wait, did this... Hold on. Is what he's saying... Maybe I misinterpreted it. Is what he's saying that they, after this whole situation, they got a mediator present? Like they wanted to originally? That just seems really, like, manipulative. That they just wanted to get that mediator to try to get him back in the first place. That's the weirdest thing about some of these unhinged people who are so obsessed with you that, like, they'll say anything on your name, is that they desperately just, like, want to be attached to you. And if you're not attached to yourself to them, like, how they want, because that's the only way that they get any level of clout, they fucking go ballistic. They start, like, slandering you, but the second you're like, oh, let's get back to be friends again, they're like, oh, of course, you know.
Actions of that mediator, a former friend of mine, and another content creator named Danny or Lord Bung. She was directly implicated in the original Twitlonger by Orion, and Bung went on herself to make a statement of support for Orion, both in her Discord server, YouTube community tab, and a few other places. The way Orion describes Bung's involvement is as the mediator of our final call, who acted as both the reason I calmed down and apologized after a fit of rage, and who was able to see through my apparent pattern of gaslighting that Orion claimed I was continuing in that call. Bung presents herself as an equal mediator for both parties, where, when giving each side equal due, came to the conclusion that I was the one acting in bad faith. They said I was incredibly aggressive during that final call, claiming I changed my story and was intense.
I probably would be aggressive too if I had a fucking unhinged psychopath like this person constantly shitting on me. So, you know, sometimes you just can't hold it in. Isn't that crazy? And, like, listen, maybe we're wrong about that. I don't know. That's just the feeling I'm getting here. It could be wrong, you know what I mean? But Kwite does have a little bit more to back it up. But what I will say is that that's, like, sometimes what people will do. They'll just keep, like, saying some dumb shit on your name over and over again to elicit a response, and then you'll have a response that seems disproportionate. You know, it's just like fucking hyping you up, and then it's like, oh, see how unreasonable this person is? It's crazy, man. It's crazy.
When questioned, she described me as being transactional socially and an angry physical drunk at the times we were together in person, and that she didn't get the sense I wanted to be her friend at all during those times. Denny also said that Orion was one of...
So then why did you stay their friend? I don't know. Like, no offense, but if you're like, I got the feeling they didn't want to be my friend, so why did you maintain friendship with them? If you didn't think that they wanted to be your friend. You know, like, okay, like, take a fucking hint, you know? Take a hint, bro.
Of her best friends, and she had seen the visceral emotions caused by the events up close for years. All of this before ending off saying that the people taking a risk in the situation are Bung and Orion, because in doing all this, it's them who risk getting destroyed by a wealthy YouTuber. Everything Bung said in her statement regarding me are opinions she's reached on her own about my quality of character.
How crazy is that? Anytime, like, sometimes people will interact with bigger YouTubers, and they'll be like, oh, they'll say shit like that. Like, they'll say, like, oh, I could really get my career destroyed, or blah, blah, blah. Like, they're really punching down. And sometimes that can be true. Not the punching down. Punching down is stupid. You know, if you're going to put your perspective out there, you know, like, people are going to talk on you. But it's like the, it's just like every time you talk about a bigger person, they go, oh, well, they're just a bigger content creator bullying me. It's like, chill the fuck out, bro. Like, Jesus Christ, like, be a man. or be a person. Well, I guess be a man in this case, Orion. Okay, that's what it means to be a real man. Okay, which you can be. I'm not saying you're not. I'm just saying, you know, you don't complain about the fight. Okay, I'm just saying, you know, you don't complain. Oh, everything is I could do blah 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 blah. That's assigning intentionality. Those are the people who are like power dynamic, who just scream power dynamic, even though like the existence of one doesn't create like fucking abuse just by virtue of their existence. You know what I mean? So.
I feel them to be very uncharitable, especially since both the events she says I was socially transactional during were industry events for my job, where part of the explicit purpose of traveling there was to meet people and network. And if these were opinions Danny held in the 2 years we stayed in contact after that final call, I unfortunately was never made aware of them or given an opportunity to discuss and perhaps rectify them with her before we last spoke. The last time I spoke with Bung was in 2020 through a brief DM exchange where she reaffirmed that she thought of me as a friend, and it's been radio silence in the 3 years following that on both sides. Now, in her community post, Bung described her and Orion as a we, like the two of them were taking the risk collectively, which directly ties Danny with the side she falls. I don't hold any of that against Danny, but in the years since we last spoke, she spent a lot of time with Orion. She works closely with Orion on Confinement, which is Bung's flagship series, and Bung and Orion dated each other as far back as 2021 from tweets I could find, and if memory serves, as recently as around this time last year. I don't have receipts for that one, that's just when I remember hearing about it for the first time in passing. None of this is to say that I am entitled somehow to Bung's time or attention, but the bias of which person Danny would lean to today is self-evident. Her image as an equal mediator is further hampered when Orion describes her as knowing better than to believe me in that final call, implying a foregone conclusion about if anything that I said in that call would be true or not. If this is the case, this would not only negate Bung's ability to act as a neutral character witness today, but also her status as a neutral mediator in that call. You could argue that Kappa's testimony when I first cut off Orion is similar, but he never tried to hold himself as a pillar of neutrality, and he certainly didn't use his framing to help falsely accuse someone else of rape, based on the fact he didn't think they wanted to be friends with him very much. The only reason Danny's testimony is relevant here is because she was meant to be Orion and I's mediator in our last spoken conversation, an event I'd like to now give my account of and perspective on in depth. One thing that me, Bung, and Orion all agree happened in that call is that I got aggressive and explosive, and at points I absolutely was. It is an emotional response that, looking back, I feel was completely reasonable, especially considering the circumstances I was put in during that conversation. This call, which I sincerely tried my best to speak civilly and keep my cool in, is with someone I distanced myself from half a year ago because of his codependence towards me and the emotional strain he put on my mental health. Someone who would now come back into my life by appearing in a video that self-admittedly was trying to destroy my career, in which he publicly outed my struggle with self-harm before I ever got to open up about it on my own, where he also claimed I was emotionally abusive to him with nothing substantiating it, and said that I dropped him from my life solely because of my arrogance over my newfound success and hunger for more of it. All of this, again, which made me certain that I had made the right choice in cutting him off. I'm coming fresh off the back of that upload. This call also notably took place on September 15th, 2018. Me and Bung talk about having the call set up and actually starting the call in our Discord DMs on that day. But meanwhile, outside and in real life, where I lived at the time, placed me and my family squarely in the path of Hurricane Florence. I had relatives closer to the coast who had moved in with us because their house was at risk of being destroyed and it was unsafe to stay there. Even where I lived further inland, the storm was a threat we had to prepare for in case of losing power, debris, and general infrastructure failure. It wasn't some kind of non-issue just because we weren't by the ocean. The storm and the new people in my house was a change of environment for me, but manageable on its own. And this isn't my attempt at bringing up an excuse for my actions, but rather a genuine factor in my ability to participate in this call and the amount of stress I was actively managing at once during the time. I let Bung know.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That, like, I mean, how could you really speak freely and openly if you've got, like, your fucking whole family listening? Making fun of you. Oh, what are you talking to your girlfriend? You'd be like, no, it's my boyfriend.
This could be an issue the day of, and she had even apologized for putting me through all of this in the middle of a hurricane. Unfortunately, it did become an issue when the basement where all of the equipment I used to make videos had flooded. My stress was threefold of thinking I'd almost lost all the expensive equipment I needed to do my job, what it meant for my family as far as costs and their future plans, and just generally still being in a hurricane. This was something I also talked about with Orion after we reached a truce of sorts in that call. The flooding caused me to have to delay the meeting till later that day and was an ongoing situation with my family.
Well, I can identify with that too, thinking that you could, like, you know, move on through, like, whatever, and then that person just, like, still being toxic. And they don't even realize they're being toxic. I think that's the biggest problem with some of these people. They don't even realize how toxic they are sometimes. It's fucking unhinged shit.
That didn't exist in the backdrop, but was an active problem during this whole thing. This call with Orion, what would without a doubt be a highly emotional and personal discussion for me, was not the most pressing thing I had going on at the time. And even then, I still made my best effort to be in that call as level-headedly as I could manage. And ultimately, there were several things that happened during the conversation itself that eventually set me off. Earlier in the day, a friend of mine, Evan, had sent me one of the pictures of Orion and I together. It was one of the ones that Orion leaked himself publicly during this current round of allegations.
Expose self-harm and face people not friends with. Okay, yeah. Damn.
At that point in time, Evan would not have had access to this picture on his own, unless Orion had posted them somewhere or shared them with people I didn't know and didn't approve of seeing my face. I brought this up to Orion, having proof that at some point he had leaked my face, and he claimed to have never done that, telling a lie directly to me in a call we were meant to patch things up. And when I mentioned...
I mean, I'm pretty sure earlier that Kwite said that, like, he may have sent it to other people as well, not just, fuck, I thought I could dodge that. I didn't know that it was... Oh, there's back damage too, damn. So maybe it wasn't them, but give them, like, super benefit of the doubt. It's possible, but You know, I'm just saying.
The evidence I had proving it, he gave no response, and unfortunately the conversation moved past it. This again makes the claim in their twitlonger of never having posted my pictures anywhere incorrect as well. Maybe Orion only meant posting it to social media like Twitter or Instagram, but as the person who got doxxed, I very much count sending my face to people I don't approve of as posting it somewhere. The trigger that directly set me off was later in that call though. My emotions were definitely running high at the time, but at some point I told my account of when we met up in February in that call, of how the single kiss that me and Orion did share was something I felt uncomfortable with doing at the time. In his twitlonger, Orion preempts my actions in that call by saying I was just further gaslighting him. This was in order to paint anything I may have done in that call as inauthentic or untrustworthy before you even find out what I did. But here he says he tried to gaslight me further, claiming that I had led him on, or worse, assaulted him instead. The assault Orion says I accused him of is in reference to me telling Orion and Danny that I was uncomfortable with that kiss. I have said the same thing happened that day for years, because I remember how weird I felt about it soon after it happened, and how my discomfort around the topic still remains when having to look back on all this as intensely as I've had to make this video. It was the same story when I vented to my friends months before that September call with Orion. It was the same when I told my therapist, the same recently when friends of mine were first approached by Orion, who went directly to Orion saying I raped him.
That kind of makes sense then to me. If so, this guy said that like, oh, I was uncomfortable with the kiss, and that doesn't necessarily mean that like Orion did anything wrong. Then it's possible that what it sounds like to me that this person crafted like a false, basically a false allegation, but like spun their, like took what actually happened, which was he felt uncomfortable from getting kissed Kwite, and then turned it around by saying like, oh no, Kwite actually made me uncomfortable, and then exaggerating what happened. That's what sounds more like happened here. Oh, Jesus, this is terrible. This is like worse than any of the other ones. Holy fuck. Sorry.
But who were still willing to hear me out all the way up to in this video. What set me off was that after I communicated that the kiss had made me uncomfortable, Orion denied it. And he said something to the effect of telling me that I was wrong and that we actually kissed more than once, saying that I had initiated it the second time. We did not do that. As I'm seeing it, Orion is lying straight to my face again about something incredibly sensitive to me. He's essentially told me that I'm wrong and I actually wanted it when we kissed, and that really I was into it so much that I kissed him again myself. Despite every denial I've made when he's asked these kind of things before, and despite me honestly communicating how he made me feel here.
Wait, I'm a little confused. Maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but it sounds like Kwite, was he saying that they kissed and he didn't like it and he felt uncomfortable, or that this person forced themselves onto him? Because I'm not sure I know which one he's referring to. Interesting.
I'm being told I'm wrong. And in fact, the way I remember it, have always remembered it from 2018 till now, it didn't even happen. I saw red. I felt like this was not the first time Orion had lied this call about something to my face, and that was this serious. I was yelling and screaming and really angry and just not handling it well. Though any claims Orion made about me throwing and breaking things are impossible for him to have known, as there were no webcams turned on in this call, and the clipping audio you may hear from a microphone isn't much to go off. And whether I was breaking...
Whatever. Maybe he did throw stuff. Who cares? It is what it is. If he got really angry, like whatever. You shouldn't do that, but if you do that, like...
shit or not, it doesn't change if whether my anger was warranted or not. The only person who would have been in real danger over Discord because of my outburst would have been me to myself. Orion says again that during this fit, all I did was try to gaslight him further in another attempt to discredit anything I might have said or done during that outburst, no matter what it was. And Orion also claimed it took Danny calming me down to get me to apologize. This is not true. In reality, I let my family know what this call would be about, so they were aware of how it might go with emotions on both ends likely to run so high. In truth, it was my dad holding me through a panic attack while I cried that helped me pull myself together enough. When I got mad in the call, I physically left the room to actively remove myself from the situation that was distressing me. I'm not sure what else I was supposed to do. Like, I was trying to handle my emotions. I was trying to manage my outburst in like the least destructive way I could, and it wasn't enough apparently for Orion. I wasn't even sure if I was going to go back in after that. It felt like a repeat of March 2018 again. It felt like I didn't get to say anything or finish any thoughts without it being shot down or talked over. Still, I went into that last call telling myself that I'd try to do better than the last time. I didn't want it to be another screaming match, and at the time I felt bad that I hadn't managed to keep my cool. At the time, in that headspace, reacting like that felt like I had failed, but now looking back on those, I realized that both times, anger was a reasonable reaction to the type of things I had been put through and told by Orion. Still, after cooling down, I did end up going back in to apologize, and I had meant it at the time, despite Orion's belief that I was insincere. Danny earlier claimed that in this call, the issue wasn't my bad temper, but that nothing ever got resolved, and instead I would just yell the loudest and win. This also isn't true, as there were things I actively apologized for in that call. Something Bung attested to me having done in our DMs, and Tusk also confirmed in the pinned comment of his video. I gave far more ground in that call than I got, even when I didn't agree with the things I was choosing to let go. Still, at that point, it was my understanding that even if it was messy, me and Orion had sorted things out and could try to move on with our lives. In hindsight, and I mean within days after the hurricane wasn't an issue anymore and I had time to think about the whole thing, I have always regretted not self-advocating for myself more in that conversation. There were issues that I never got resolved or to even...
I feel like that happens to a lot of us, like all the time, especially when you're young. There's a lot of instances where you're like, wow, I wish I did more. You know, it's like almost a meme where people are like, oh yeah, I was up really late last night thinking about this, that, or the other thing. You know what I mean? Wishing that like I said this in the conversation instead. I feel like that's somewhat of like a normal thing. you know, to experience. It's part of life, you know. You got to learn up. You got to grow up and learn to advocate for yourself better.
Mentioned to Orion. I didn't get closure on the things I brought up to Orion, like leaking my face. And a lot of that was because I was more concerned at the time with the hurricane I was in the middle of. Because of that, I conceded things that I really shouldn't have and probably wouldn't have normally to try and get it over with quicker and back to focusing on my family sooner. The thing is, despite the way he claims I treated him all the time, right after we put a lid on our differences, Orion floated the idea of trying to be friends again immediately after that. I was uneasy about that concept as soon as it got mentioned. But since I was the one conceding more fault, even if it was just to get this whole thing over with, I at least decided to give it a try. For a period of time, I genuinely tried to DM amicably with Orion again. Most of these conversations after that call took place over Twitter DMs. I can only prove my side of the conversation is real, as Twitter archive viewer is busted with Orion's side of the conversation. It only works up to like May 2017, and their Twitter is suspended, so I can't go just directly to it. What I was able to grab was Orion's side of the messages by digging through the actual files themselves. I've lined Orion's messages up with the screenshots of the DMs I've sent to prove that at least my end of the exchanges in these logs are real, but the only way I can even get an archive of what Orion said is through Control-Fing his Twitter ID and the direct messages JSON file. And full disclosure, these are relatively easy to fake. You can load them up in Notepad. If you're skeptical because of that, it's totally fair, and if anybody knows a way I can verify these, please let me know. Regardless, I believe the messages I can prove I sent still paint the nature of these conversations fairly accurately. Orion talked about how getting to be friends again was a knot in his chest going away that he didn't realize was there. He said he had thought of this scenario before he went to bed tons of times. Very early in, I told Orion that I'm not sure how I feel about...
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said before, right? Like, it sounds like this person's whole motivation is just to be friends with them, so they're having like this unhinged fucking relationship where they're like trying to ruin their life because they're like, you have to have me in your life. You know, and then like this, but the second that it's available, they'll be friends again. Like, yeah, 100%. Absolutely. I mean, that fucking makes perfect sense to me. I called it, guys. I'm so smart. I'm such a smart, handsome, fat guy. Woo!
Being friends again, that I'd give it a try, but I can't promise that I'll be comfortable enough to follow through by the end. There was a discussion about me being more upfront with what bothers me, which I agreed at the time was somewhat my fault, but looking back, I definitely expressed my feelings before.
Yeah, maybe. That's something that this guy might need to work on, or have needed to work on. He seems like the kind of person who is a little bit of a pushover. Not like a bad, like, I'm not saying he's a bad person. Like, we all have our struggles. But, you know, it's possible that they need to, like, stand their ground a little bit more, you know? That's fair.
For all this, and it often didn't matter, as Orion would go on ahead with certain things I didn't want to do anyways, but I did really try for like a month. But every time I messaged Orion, it felt forced on my end, and I was always incredibly uncomfortable speaking with him. Regardless of either of our apologies to the other, I could not get past the totality of our history, and especially the fresh wound of him publicly outing me for having self-harmed. Eventually, one day, Orion asked if I was free to call, and I wasn't comfortable doing that. This time, though, I didn't want to dance around talking to Orion about that like I had last time. So I decided to be upfront about this and communicate it exactly like he had asked me to when we first started talking again. My angle was that we've hopefully settled things, that I've got no ill will for Orion and wished him the best moving forward, but that after giving it an honest effort, I didn't feel being in each other's lives again was on the table. Just conversing with Orion through text was enough to make me anxious every time. There was some back and forth where Orion wanted to at least keep trying it, and I could call it off if I was ever uncomfortable again. Honestly, I knew that would be wasted time for us both by the end of it. I said I forgave him on some things, but I couldn't forget them, so I didn't want to continue speaking. To some extent, everything I apologized for in that final call, I was sincere about. I did regret getting angry in the call at the time. I was willing to let certain things go and take responsibility for things I didn't really feel were my fault in order to let bygones be bygones so we could move forward. But after having to re-examine my relationship with Orion these last few weeks, how he treated me while we knew each other and after.
Yep, I've been there, man. This is very identifiable stuff here. Okay, I can really relate to a lot of the stuff that's being said here, guys. Holy shit.
What happened in that call, how much I wish I had said.
Because sometimes it's like not even worth it. It's like small, it's so weird because it's like small things. It's like, you know what, like I maybe like it's one of those things where like, you know, you're right, but you're like, I don't know, you're being like overly empathetic. You're like, maybe I said something and they interpret it wrong and it's not really a big deal. It's not really worth it. But the thing about a lot of these situations too is that like it's a lot of little things that add up, and it's like, you know, it's not necessarily one big thing, right? It's like 17 small things. You know, and it's like individually, it seems like you're overreacting. It's like, oh, this upset me. But when you put them all together, it's like, wait, that was fucking, like, that's a lot, right? And that's like that's the fucking most frustrating thing to deal with, is when like your issue with somebody is like 1,000 little things that by themselves don't seem like a big deal. But when you put them all together, it literally paints a picture. But it's hard to like articulate that, that greater picture being put together, you know?
and never got closure for, I am retracting anything I apologized for that night, as I do not stand by any of it. My reactions to the situations I was put in were completely reasonable. And considering what I've been dealing with in recent weeks, I am done being the bigger person so that my abuser will leave me alone, because he clearly won't. It was hard for me to gauge how Orion felt about being cut off again, even if it was on better terms this time, but I thought I could at least get back to pushing forward to what's next for me. The whole thing was emotionally and personally taxing, but after all was said and done, we ended up back where we were before. Me and Orion weren't talking, and I was trying to move on with my life. For the next few years, it seemed to stay pretty quiet. Occasionally, I saw people saying I was a shitty person, saying things that echoed what Orion had said about my character in the past. But considering that this video exists, that peace obviously didn't last. So I'd like to track one of the people who's always had a generally negative opinion of me that Orion later befriended, and how the severity of the reasons for disliking me escalated over time. First, this guy said I was getting less attention than I used to, and this was right before my blow up. Almost a year later, he's in my Q&A replies asking a somewhat genuine question.
Same here, dude. Same here. I'll hit my blow up, and then all you silly gooses will feel very silly, like a goose.
When I hit 500,000 subs, he's telling me, this is your peak, and you need to face reveal, otherwise you'll never grow more. And even with all that, they still said they couldn't judge me personally, even though they didn't like my videos. But he still hates my thumbnails and thinks very negatively of my viewers. In 2020, they upgraded me from a shitty YouTuber to a shitty person in general. And at some point, they started feeling this strongly enough that if they saw me mentioned anywhere, they would go out of their way to say how much they hate me. And it was a few years later where the Hail Mary finally dropped, where in early 2022, unprompted and in a reply thread completely unrelated to me, this guy was the first person to ever call me a rapist. This was the first time I'd ever heard anything like this being said about me. And I'm very caught off guard because I have never even had sex before. They alluded to me being a supposed sex pest one more time, saying it to folks whose tweets I'd used in my videos, and it became apparent that this whole thing was an event that they'd been anticipating. The day the allegations dropped, they said, Kwite's only hope now is stop Asian hate. In my opinion, in a situation like this, that is very out of line. To me,
I'm sorry. It is out of line, but it was a little funny. I'm so sorry. It wasn't. It's not appropriate. Damn. I'm so sorry. That gave me the giggles. Okay, that's a little funny. Okay. Yeah, that's inappropriate. Don't say that.
It demonstrated a confidence and satisfaction in my suffering that had been brewing for a while. They were even in my editor's replies, instigating with someone who had nothing to do with these allegations other than having some association with me. He parroted that line where Kwite's taken a long time to respond, so he's looking suspicious, equating my silence to guilt. If I knee-jerk reacted to this, it would have done me no good. The escalation of this person's negative opinions of me over time, from when they were just an individual who my content wasn't for, to whenever they met Orion, and as they spent more time around him, is apparent. When this person started...
Yeah, man, it's not a bad idea to take a deep breath and kind of form your thoughts out. Honestly, I think Kwite's like, he's not lucky because the situation's really messed up, but he's almost lucky that's happened like now, because if this happened during like the Me Too movement, he would have been canceled. It doesn't matter. Like you know what I mean? Like the atmosphere, I would say is probably a little bit more reasonable. Oh, I just went right into that. It's probably a little more reasonable right now overall, than it has been before. Which is, I think, because back then, like, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Hey, it doesn't really matter who's right or who's wrong. Sometimes, depending on like how the public sphere is feeling about a particular topic. So good, because it seems like he's not. Like, he seems like he's innocent. Honestly,
started getting comfortable enough to say I'd done disgusting, incredibly serious things completely unsubstantiated, both directly to people who enjoyed my content and in a wider public setting, regardless if it was relevant to discussion, to how they've been taking petty joy in mocking people who are affected by these events because they're adjacent to them now that they've gone fully public. All that is emblematic of the lengths Orion has been willing to go to try and hurt me over time, and how when one option failed, there has been seemingly no upper limit to how far they'll take it if it means that it will cause me harm in some way. Orion is not just saying I raped him, he's throwing every negative thing I could have possibly done to him at the wall to try and get anything to stick. They went for transphobia, sexual assault, saying slurs, gaslighting, emotional abuse, anger issues, threatening him. Take your pick of any of those. It doesn't matter because Orion didn't give evidence for any of them. Despite Orion saying how he doesn't want to dox me and how he won't share certain evidence because I want to stay anonymous. It rings hollow when they haven't presented much of their own evidence at all and multiple times have leaked my private info, most recently in such a huge and public way. Orion accused me of doing the worst thing you can do to somebody to him as another escalation. And he put my face out there against my will with the label of rapist attached to its review. I have been genuinely anxious to go outside.
67 cents. Pop, I love when you laugh at inappropriate times.
Well, thank you.
I do that too. I can't help it.
Yeah, sometimes you just can't help it, man. You know, sometimes it's just unfortunate. You know, it's not my fault.
The chances of this actually happening were relatively small, but what do you usually want to do to someone when you think they're a rapist? Not very positive things, I imagine. And on some level, Orion was okay with that possibility. He completely stole my agency and privacy away from me, and there are ways I will never recover from this. Having to go over these logs to make my case has been emotionally painful, and while people saying awful things about me on the internet is not new, it was happening now more than ever, and the types of things people would say was a lot crueler. It took him going this far, but after 6 years of trying to hurt me and my friendships, constant emotional abuse, I've had to let lie because responding to it would have only hurt me more. My abuser has managed to make a a permanent mark on me in a way he's only gotten to do in private before, but now gets to share with the public. He weaponized...
Yeah, that's really unfortunate, Quiet, but have you ever lost a Hades game when you almost beat it? I mean, come on. Who was really struggling more here, me or you? Nah, that sucks, man. That's really unfortunate.
People's good conscience and their compassion for others who they believe suffered something awful to hurt me in one of the most widest-reaching ways possible. Public shame. And from what I've seen, Orion has been reveling in it. He used the Kwite fanart hashtag in his original tweet with the allegations, so anybody looking through the tag for art would definitely see what was being said. He locked his replies to mutuals only, so nobody he didn't know could say anything to directly contest him in his replies. He promoted the Drop Kwite and Stand With Orion hashtags for people to use as a rallying cry and to reach as many ears as possible. He shared a bit.ly link named after the Drop Kwite hashtag that led directly to his Twitlonger to make it as accessible as possible for new people to read. He was retweeting and liking any tweet in support of him that condemns me in the harshest terms possible. Like a lot of allegations towards a public figure, this was curated to reach as many people who are or would be viewers of me as possible. The idea behind that is usually to spread awareness of a dangerous individual, but Orion used those same mechanisms of virality. He showed my face to at least prove he knew me and to take away my anonymity, and he accused me of the worst thing he possibly could. They attempted to get as many people as they could to believe I'm a monster. And because all these people think I'm an irredeemable piece of shit with what Orion's shown, they have like an A-OK in their head to say like awful and hurtful shit about me because they think I deserve it. It was another way of Orion directing as much harm to me as he could manage. Orion pushed hard on the idea of believe victims first, no matter what, both through the tweets he chose to share and by holding a Twitter space where one of the folks speaking...
Yeah, I hate that narrative of like believe all victims, you know? Like you should take all accusations seriously, of course, but you know, to just believe somebody. I mean, we live in a society of innocent versus innocent until proven guilty for a reason. And we really cannot go back on that as much as people might want to go back on that. You know what I mean? You have to engage. You have to just engage more intelligently with it.
Went on to champion how always supporting the victim, even if it turns out to be fake, is the right choice, all because it costs you as the bystander nothing.
It costs you absolutely nothing, and it costs you literally less than brain cells to believe a victim. And, you know, if allegations are proven false, then they're proven false, and if the allegations are right, then you back to the right horse. And
as someone who has not only just gone through the falsely accused side of this, but someone who has also made the same mistake of acting too quickly on allegations and hurting people I cared for because of it. This type of thinking is harmful and needs to stop. It is absolutely a good and noble policy to support victims when they speak. You should support their ability to speak and not ridicule them for speaking, but the saying is trust but verify. Orion framed himself as a victim in this situation. He did it to try and use the way the internet generally reacts to allegations in order to publicly abuse me and hurt me on the widest scale he could imagine, continuing that same pattern of behavior he's shown towards me for years. I wouldn't say you were complicit in my abuse if you didn't stay neutral or even if you outright attacked me, but you actively progressed my abuser's goal of trying to hurt me in any way he could by taking Orion at face value. By trying to support an accuser as the victim with no questions asked, you helped an abuser further hurt their target. At the very least, I am more certain now than ever that cutting off Orion was absolutely the right thing for my mental health and my pursuit of happiness. I was escaping an incredibly toxic relationship and dynamic that was abusive, and ever since, Orion has continued to try and harm.
I wonder how like relieving it is, though. Like I know this is probably more of a silver lining perspective, but now that like this is probably something that's been weighing on him for a long time, and he's not really been able to say anything about it, right? Based on the situation, and now he's able to just be like, yeah, well, I've dealt with it. Like, there's nothing else this Orion person could pretend to hold over his head, you know? So I guess there's at least that little bit of silver lining there. But what a stressful scenario, man. That's gotta be fucked. I feel bad for him.
My reputation, my mental well-being, and is at least okay with the idea of me getting hurt physically, either at my own hands, considering my past, or someone else's, considering that they doxed me and what they accused me of. When ruining my friendships failed, when going to the public the first time failed, when trying to have me back in his life again failed, I thought finally he'd moved on, but I was wrong, and he went on to accuse me of the worst thing he possibly could. Through this whole situation, he continues the pattern of trying to ruin my friendships, my livelihood, my passion, and my reputation, among other things, and this is just another milestone of how far Orion is willing to go to hurt me. My abuser took advantage of the aggressively sympathetic and viral way the internet typically reacts to rape allegations to continue tormenting me. A lot of people have brought up the Slazo situation from back in 2019 during this whole thing, saying that it's ironic I was part of pushing those allegations, and now I'm suffering my own, like it's karma.
I have no idea who the Slazo thing. I've heard it a couple times before, but I don't really understand it, so can't really comment on it.
Coming around. And I mean, on some level, I can't really say they're wrong. I don't mean in the idea that I knew the allegations were always fake and I was trying to use them to end his career. I did not do that, and I never would knowingly. I'm not certain where the idea of me being malicious in that situation first came from, but I'd been approached by someone I trusted and had other people I trusted vouching for them, and the evidence I'd seen at the time made me believe someone I knew had done something horrible. But with hindsight, it's a lot easier to see how careless and irresponsible I was being. It's because I saw Slazo as a friend that how I handled those allegations wasn't good enough. I failed him as a friend.
Well, it sounds like it was back during a time where like all allegations were overly affirmed, and people didn't look at these things more critically. You just look at what happened to Call Me Carson, bro. Shit's fucking crazy.
By believing what I saw wholesale and not doing the bare minimum of what he deserved. By not even waiting for him to give his side before making a judgment. An event that has now echoed itself in my life. I have felt guilty that he suffered like that, at least in part because of my negligence ever since. And now I can directly relate to him after going through all this shit. I feel like I owe that guy a third apology, and still nothing I do will make up entirely for what I helped put him through. Now, having gone through it for real myself and hearing people constantly say that I tried to end someone's career based on something I knew was a lie has been frustrating, especially because I had been putting up with this exact kind of public smearing on a lower level from Orion for ages, even before this Lazo stuff happened. I have laid out my case here as best as I can. I talked about a lot of personal things before I was ready or never planned on sharing, but I hope this has helped to give a more holistic view of mine and Orion's relationship. Truth be told, if this video gets across how I hope it does, it would only be to get back to a spot worse than where I was at before. Being called a rapist or a sex pest is a label that's probably never going to fully leave my name now because of these allegations and how far they ended up getting despite having no legs to stand on.
That's possible, man. Shit's fucking crazy on the internet, you know? Wait. Good. But, you know, I think I don't know, from what I'm hearing, this seems very credible. It sounds like he'll be able to, like, move through it. So anybody that actually matters will, like, you know, they won't, they won't give a shit. Like, that, the whole, like, dumb joke that I made when I was younger, well, not that much, well, like 3 years ago, where I was like, if she's old enough to bleed, she's old enough to read, and I thanked somebody who allegedly slept with a 14-year-old 23. It was taken out of context intentionally. People still, like, say dumb shit, like, try to call me a pedophile for that, because they're fucking dumb children. But what are you gonna do, man? Like, this, like, we're just at a point now. It's like, if you're gonna think something dumb, then you're just a dumb person. Like, I think even apparently somebody was telling me that Tofia person that I've defended from the fucking obnoxious bitch Aunt Karen was like, call me a pedophile or something. I think that she was talking to Garrett about it. It's like, what? I don't know, man. That's you guys are unhinged, man. It's, what are you gonna do, bro? You know. What are you gonna do, dude? Oh, fuck me in the ass. Don't really do that though. Okay, I'm not gay. Even a dildo in the ass by a girl is gay. Okay, so don't fuck me in the ass. All right.
There are several people I was friends with, or at least friendly with, who distanced themselves from me over this that I may not get to talk to again. And I can't really blame them for that. I understand why they made those choices. At one point, I made the same choice in their position. Hearing that somebody you know, even on a surface level, might be capable of one of the worst things you can do to someone else is terrifying. I just ask that if anybody who is in that position and distanced themselves away from me because of this whole thing and you're watching this, I would really appreciate the chance to get to talk to you about this and try and sort things out. But if not, I understand why. This has dredged up bad memories. My face was put in the public against my will, as well as a wealth of other personal details. Pretty much everything I put into maintaining my privacy and trying to be just a normal person outside of YouTube is just kind of gone. I'm going to be taking some time off, at least a month. I don't know when or if I'll be back. I'm not entirely sure if this whole thing or the nature of this job is for me anymore.
I feel you, man.
That's all for now.
That's rough. Well, very thorough job of setting the record straight. Frankly, when, you know, I think you did a great job. I think that... Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. I feel bad for the guy. It sounds like this Orion person's like a really shitty, manipulative person that, like, doesn't... And that's probably the reason why this Orion person has no real friends and nobody actually loves them. And that's a struggle they'll have to deal with for the rest of their life, of just constantly going through, like, relationships that, you know, that they can't really hold, and they're always going to question why, but it's because of them. So, hey, tough shit, bro. That's what it is. Good video, though. I feel bad for Kwite, though. He shouldn't disappear. But I understand wanting to take a break from it and taking a big deep breath, because being internet person can be fucking stressful as hell. So, yeah.
I want Papa Gut to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.